Do you think the system has scared people, or has Trump himself scared people?
He has now seen the evil of the Democrat Party, and we're watching the evil of the Democrat Party burst forth right now in everything that's going on.
You had money taken, buying power, sent technically overseas, but the money comes back to American contractors. So if you're one of those American contractors, you just got richer.
Florida man does this, Florida man does that, Florida man smokes meth and wrestles an alligator and saves a child. And Florida man was right about a lot of something.
Dave Rubin, welcome back to the show.
Tom, it's good to be with you. I got to tell you, I have seen a lot of operations. I'm OG podcaster over here. I've built a couple studios in my day. You're doing all right, man.
Thank you, sir. We definitely
This is quite an operation you have going on over here.
It's pretty cool. I'm excited to see how far we can take it for sure.
But this is the Batcave, right? Like somewhere there's a Batman thing. You are Batman. Is that what's happening here?
Obviously. I don't usually talk about that on camera, but yes.
I just blew your spot.
Now
That's it.
Yeah, it's fine.
That's how it all ends for Batman going on a podcast.
Exactly.
Bruce Wayne, I'm Batman. Well, what can I do?
Yeah, I suppose if I really were Batman, I never would have owned it. So alas. But trying to help my boy out by throwing people off the scent, you see.
Clever.
I thought so.
Yeah.
Let me ask.
Yeah.
Biden has just announced that despite his performance in the debate, he is going to be the 2024 nominee. What happens if Biden wins?
What happens if Biden wins? Wow. Do you want to jump right to that, or should we talk a little bit about his mental state first? Like truly,
if that's part of your answer, give it to me.
Well, I would say it's obvious to everyone watching this, listening to this, everyone in this country, everyone in the world that pays any remote attention to politics. It is obvious to them that he has been degraded cognitively very significantly. I think what maybe wasn't obvious to people was how significantly he was degraded, but it was obvious even 5 years ago. What's interesting that has happened in the last, say, 10 days post-debate is that the machine, the system, the matrix, whatever you want to call it, it can no longer control the narrative as it relates to Biden. So for years, literally before he was president, when he was on the campaign trail, and even when he was VP, the slips were starting to happen, the flubs, the confusions, the slurring, all of that was happening. And by the way, we should all have sympathy. I think it goes without saying, but I always think it's worth saying at least once in an interview. We should have sympathy for anyone dealing with all of these things. Everyone will either be hit by it personally, or will have a grandparent or parent or somebody that they love will be hit by this. I had two grandmothers that both had dementia, one into Alzheimer's at the end, one of whom, because I was doing stand-up in New York, so I was only working at night, I was spending a lot of time with her during the day, going to the doctor. So I've been around a lot of this, a lot of the stiffness that he has. There's a lot there that anyone, and I'm obviously not a doctor, can see, and something is not right. What happened at that debate was that for all of the ways the media can lie about it or confuse you or play the shell game, just get you to look at something else while he's kind of falling apart, it was so obvious to everyone watching that split screen, not just the confusions. There was that moment about 6 or 7 minutes into the debate where he just completely lost his train of thought and he flubbed out that sentence, and Jake Tapper kind of saved him. And everyone watching was thinking the same thing, like, holy cow, how bad is this going to be for the next hour and a half? And then for an hour and a half, we watched a split screen of, his jaw agape, the confusion, the sort of blank look in his eyes, everything else. The reason that I'm reiterating all that is that it was so obvious to everyone that they could not hold in the lie anymore. So that's why immediately the debate ends, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, every online pundit or whatever we all are, everybody was saying the same thing. Like, there's just no doubt about this now. I think one of the ways the system has worked over the years is that it's able to launder the lies, to kind of slow down the lies. So, for example, very fine people on both sides, that Donald Trump went to Charlottesville and saw the protesters and said they're very fine people on both sides, somehow meaning that the white supremacists were very fine people and that the other people there were very fine. No, Donald Trump said the next sentence, which was, I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis or the white supremacists, blah, blah, blah. But the system allowed that lie to exist for years, right? The system allowed the lies of COVID to exist for years. The system allowed the lies of Brett Kavanaugh as a serial rapist to exist for years. It let the lies of the Covington kids are racist, Jesse Smollett was lynched, all of these things. But what happened that night is something that very rarely happens, that the truth was so freaking obvious to everyone in real time, the system didn't know how to lie about it. And that's why all these pundits that have no problem lying, the Joe Scarboroughs, all of these people that are in essence paid to lie at these corporate news organizations, they simply did not know what to do. So now what has burst forth is that we're watching a system that is completely in flux right now, because it genuinely, I believe, is as out of control as it seems right now. He now, for whatever's left in his brain, or whether it's Jill Biden running it or it's Barack Obama behind the scenes, whatever, he is running his own operation to see if they can push him over the finish line. Kamala has her own agenda. The media has their own agenda. They have to cover their tracks for the obvious lies that they've been doing over the last couple of years. So anyone, literally anyone that you could have in this chair that you ask that question to, or ask to make the prediction of what will happen or how this is going to happen or what would that second term look like, has genuinely no idea. Because by the time I finish this sentence, he could be incapacitated. We have no idea. Well, I'll ask you a question. Do you honestly believe he has been running this administration? Do you think he has been functioning as the chief executive for the last 4 years? To me, the answer is very obviously no. And in a weird way, I would say he is the ultimate avatar of what a deep state or managerial class would want. You'd want sort of a mind-muddled 50-year career politician to just be in there and just keep the show going. And that's why I thought that Barack Obama's tweet about it 2 or 3 days later was so insanely ridiculous, where he was like, everyone has a bad day, but Joe Biden's in charge and blah, blah. It's like, Barack Obama, you came in with hope and change, and here you are running cover for a man that we know is cognitively declined, who's a 50-year politician. Like, that is not hope and change. But let me throw the question back to you, because I occasionally host a podcast. Do you think he's been running the show? Because that's what I think is the main issue that we all have to sort out, beyond whether he's a complete vegetable or not. Like, who's running the show? And I just don't know. Probably Obama-ish, but I don't know.
I don't think that he is. And I wonder how much ability a president has to actually run the country. So I just can't. We were discussing this before we started rolling. I have come to looking at politics, caring about politics so late in my life. So I have a very different view upon this, which is I'm obsessed with getting people to understand that everything has utility or a lack of utility. Why does that matter? So I look at everything through the lens of an entrepreneur. So you have a goal, you know where you're trying to get to, and then you say, what's going to be the thing that gets me there? The idea, the policy, the whatever. And then you try it and you see if it shows signs through a measurable metric of whether or not it's moving you towards that. So when I look at this, the question I ask myself is, why does the public want a president that is, I think you said, brain muddled? Why would they want that? So when I look at it, I feel like an alien watching a civilization that
Right.
I just don't quite yet understand. I'm not even saying that my way is the right way. I'm just saying it feels very confusing to me. So I would love an answer to that question. Why do you think the American public, some percentage, seemingly close to half, would consider voting for somebody who is muddled?
Okay, so that I can answer a little more clearly, because I think there's a very clear answer to it, which is that whatever percentage of people are going to vote for Joe Biden, let's just assume he's the nominee come November, which, by the way, I think is 50-50 at best. I mean, they're trying to figure out how to get him out. Everyone understands that now. He may just not leave. Why does a certain amount of people want that? The answer to that is, well, first off, we have a fake binary choice. It's very obvious that what should be happening in this country 20 years post social media and sort of a flourishing internet, and how much the world has changed, since World War II, it should not be two guys who are basically 80 who came from a different world. It should actually, we mentioned it right before we started, we have like 3 months between us. We're both 48. It should be someone about our age. Roughly, it should be a Gen X person, someone that actually came before the internet, grew up before the internet, remembers that world, has now become an adult in that, let's say, last 2 decades, still is young enough to be strong enough and have our faculties enough and our body to be out there fighting, have all sorts of other reasons to be fighting for the future because we're going to be part of it, as opposed to being geriatric people. And I say that as someone that is definitely voting for Trump and largely likes Trump. I don't like all of his behaviors. I was for DeSantis in the primary, so I can criticize him too, obviously. But if you only have a binary choice, if a system exists that just gives you these two, that's where we're at. We may not like that. We may want to change that. Okay, fine. But if the system only gives you these two, and now you see one guy who's completely broken mentally, I mean, to the point where he really can't say a full sentence anymore. I don't know if you saw the interview with George Stephanopoulos, but they did that as a softball to him. Like, dude, can you just for 22 minutes say anything remotely sane? And he can't. He really cannot. Well, what do you do then? If you take a guy, he's mind muddled, and then if you just quickly, if we were to look at the policies, has immigration been good? Well, about 7 to 10. Some people are saying 12 million illegals have come in under him. So I think you can objectively say that's not good. Interest rates, inflation, not good. I always say the only things that I think I mentioned this to you when you were on my show. The only two things that I really, because I'm not an economics guy per se, that I really look at in terms of economics are when you go to the grocery store, are things just exploding in price, or are they kind of where you think they're supposed to be? Well, if you look at a pound of beef that used to be like $5.99, now it's $9.99 or $11.99.
But if it's all trash, why are people voting for him? There's
no,
something
so I'll
at
get to it. So I just wanted to run through a couple of the bad things. So if and interest rates are the other ones, and those are very high right now. So okay, so now I'll answer your question. The answer is if you can scare the hell out of half the people about the other guy, that's why they'll vote for the guy who is completely mind muddled. That's it. And that's all they've been running on. There is no positive message coming from the Democrats right now that Joe Biden, 81-year-old Joe Biden, has the wherewithal and the policies to fix things. He has largely, you like outcomes. Well, unless your intention was to destroy the country, why else would you allow 7 to 10 million people in the country in 3 years? We can have an honest debate about immigration, and maybe we would agree largely, maybe we wouldn't. I'd be happy to have that conversation. But no one in their right mind in the history of the world ever thought you create a nation state and then you just say to everybody, come on in, let's see what happens, especially in a time when we have political strife post October 7th. Like there's a lot of weird energy in the system right now. You might want to know who's in your country. So if the result you wanted to get was to largely hamper the United States, you might usher in all of the policies that he has. So the direct answer to your question is, why would people vote for it? Because the system has scared them about the guy that's actually trying, I would say, largely to save the system that has offered more opportunity for 350 million Americans that live in this country and all of our predecessors in 250 years. It's incredible and scary and wild and nuts.
Do you think the system has scared people, or has Trump himself scared people?
Well, it's a little bit of both. Look, it's a little bit of both in that he speaks loosely. By the way, he's gotten a lot better. If you noticed during the debate, he was extremely measured and controlled.
Never interrupt your enemy while they're destroying themselves.
His answer on abortion, and I always consider myself begrudgingly pro-choice. I want it to be safe and rare, which, by the way, was the Democrat position always for decades and decades. Unfortunately, the Democrat position has largely become 8-month abortions are fine. I mean, we're in California where there's, in essence, no limits on abortion. Trump gave the most thoughtful answer, a 5-minute answer on abortion that I thought was the most honest, thoughtful thing he has ever said. It was clear. It was cogent. He even acknowledged that it might not be safe electorally what he's saying because it would get some of his own base upset, meaning that he is not for a national ban or anything else. It's a little bit of both with Trump. So he's done some of the exaggerations. He's coddled some weird people. He's done all of that stuff. But if you just look at the results, and again, you're a results guy, if you just look at the results of Trump, and let's just do it till COVID, and then we can talk about COVID if you want. But if you just look at basically the 2 years of the Trump presidency before COVID, the economy was seriously sharp. As Trump said at the State of the Union, we had lowest all-time black unemployment and Latino unemployment. And the Congressional Black Caucus, if you remember, AOC and the rest of them sat there like this when he said that. We had the Abraham Accords, 7 peace deals signed in the Middle East, and Saudi Arabia was about to happen too. The world was pretty good. Putin did not go into Ukraine. There was an order to the world because of a strong America. Now look, did COVID just change everything, obviously? And did he get rolled in many ways by the deep state? And he, his own base has to grapple with the fact that they hate the vaccine, and he pushed warp speed, and he allowed Fauci to do a lot of stuff and all of those things. I think they've largely forgave him for that. I think it would be worth always remembering it so it doesn't happen again if he becomes president. But you could probably argue it a little bit of both ways. Has the system, he's not a racist. He's not a racist. He's not. The New Republic has a issue out this week where they have him as Hitler, basically with the Hitler mustache and everything. And it's like his daughter converted to Judaism to marry Jared Kushner, and he has 3 Jewish grandchildren who all go to Jewish day school. Like, he's not Hitler. He does not hate black people. He does not hate people based on the color of their skin. I think largely what he represents the individual in a system that is mostly collective. And what does the collective hate the most? The individual. So that really is what the fight is sort of politically at the moment, I would say.
What do you think about...
And that's not to dismiss some of the errors in speaking, let's say, or the exaggerations or any of those things, obviously.
Yeah, I have a feeling that Trump creates the atmosphere in which he can be turned into a weapon with which he can be bludgeoned himself. So
yes, he's not winning an award for discipline, but again, it's gotten. Would you agree that it seemingly has gotten much better in the last couple of months?
Yes, the debate to me went like this. Yeah. So one, I was at an RFK event in the audience there, so it was very interesting. So I saw it as if it were a debate super cool with 3 people. By the way. Yeah. Really brilliant. Yeah. And so I'm watching Biden, and I have just this mix of emotions, same as you, where I'm very sad that this is happening to any human. My wife's grandmother had dementia. That was brutal to watch. So all those emotions mixed with this sense of when I was a teenager, I just could not have been more America's amazing. It made me feel like I could do anything. I did not grow up with money, but it made me believe that I could go anywhere, do anything. I heard you once say, if you're a Gen Xer, the following statement will ring true. And when you said it, it rang true to me. It just wasn't cool to be racist. Like you didn't think about it. It was just very much like my mom from the time I was born was like spouting Martin Luther King Jr. So that's just the vibe that we grew up with.
Or hate gays or any of that. We actually were there. We really were.
So watching the debate, I was like, okay, hold on a second. Where is all the hope, the excitement, the vision for America that will make people today feel the way that I felt as a teenager? Like, hey, you can do this. Here is the path. This is what you need to go do. That was the thing that was missing for me from both Biden and Trump. Mm-hmm. Trump was disciplined. And so it was, like watching a kid who is historically throwing temper tantrums, like actually keep it reined in. And I was like, hey, well done, Donnie, you're learning. Like that was, from that perspective, very sweet. But with RFK, at least he has a message, which was like, this is the America we want to get back to. I want people to feel inspired. I want them to understand how to go forward. I want them to see how my policies are going to make their life better. Anyway, that resonated way more with me. Now, do you think that RFK is mathematically electable, or is this just like a Ross Perot haha funny thing that we'll remember in 20 years?
Well, it's funny because Ross Perot, for as haha as it was, and I remember it well at the time, and watching those debates and that moment with, what was his name? Walter Stockdale was his VP, and he gets up there and he's like, none of you know me or should know me. Like there were some funny, weird things happening back then. But the guy got, 16% of the vote, and in essence caused Bill Clinton to win. So for as silly as that whole thing was, there was really something there. And he was echoing a lot of the things that ultimately Ron Paul ended up echoing and things that Trump ended up echoing and everything else. First, let me just say, I really personally like RFK. I've interviewed him a couple times. We've done public events together. We've had private meals together. He's met my family. He is a good, decent, nice man. He loves this country. I don't agree with him on all the policies. Even when I've interviewed him where we've debated some of the things, like he was not for the Supreme Court decision that reversed affirmative action at colleges. And we got into it, and I have to give him credit. After about 7 minutes of kind of going back and forth totally respectfully, he kind of more came around to my position, which obviously in a debate I'm happy to see. But in another way I saw as a little bit of a weakness because I was like, you should have thought that through before you're talking to somebody about it. In essence, that you don't solve past discrimination or past perceived discrimination with current discrimination. I don't want to discriminate against an Asian kid who studies hard just because someone else was discriminated against. It just that will only perpetuate racism. But he kind of came around on that, which was, again, I think it was nice, and it also showed a little bit of weakness.
If you know me, you know I am obsessed with optimizing my sleep. I go to bed at 9 p.m. every night and let my body wake up naturally, so no alarms. I am always looking for ways to improve my sleep quality, and that's why I'm excited about 8 Sleep's Pod 4 Ultra. This isn't just any sleep tech. It cools, heats, and even elevates automatically. It's clinically proven to give you up to 1 more hour of quality sleep every night, and getting as much sleep as humanly possible is the way to cognitively optimize. It tracks your sleep stats with 99% accuracy so you can truly disconnect and leave your wearables on the nightstand. This technology is for anyone who's serious about improving their sleep quality. Head to 8sleep.com/impact and use code IMPACT to get $350 off your Pod 4 Ultra. They currently ship to the US, Canada, the UK, Europe, and Australia. It's officially summer, and if you want to indulge in a glass or 2 of alcohol, but don't want to feel crappy the next day, you should try Z-Biotics. Z-Biotics, the pre-alcohol probiotic drink, is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Z-Biotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly as always, and you will feel your best the next day. Go to zbiotics.com/impact to get 15% off your first order when you use IMPACT at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember, just head to zbiotics.com/impact and use the code IMPACT at checkout for 15% off. Thank you to Z-Biotics for sponsoring this episode and all of our good times. So let me push on that for a second.
Sure.
So is that what you think is necessary to be elected, to have fully formed thoughts, or you actually don't like it when a candidate doesn't have fully formed thoughts?
That one I thought was so obvious to me, I would say. If you truly believe in the classically liberal values that I believe he believes, that are so associated with his family name, it would be a very obvious one to me that you cannot solve discrimination with discrimination, that you would never want Harvard to be looking at all of the applications they got and be like, okay, we have to have these quotas. We used to all agree quotas are bad, but certainly, and it was particularly against Asian students, but it was against Jewish students too, and it was also against white students, but Asians particularly, you would not want, so some kid, why would you punish a kid, in essence, a 16-year-old kid whose parents, first or second generation, maybe owned a bodega or something, as a lot of them did where I grew up in Long Island? Why would you punish that kid because his parents came to America, worked really hard, taught him the right things? Instead of going to summer camp, he went to math class. And now you're going to punish him. Guess what you're going to do? You're going to make him racist. How do you think he will feel? Now he gets into a lesser school. He says he sees someone with lesser grades get into that school based on the color of their skin. Now they're both 25. The other guy, by the way, he also got a mortgage at a better rate because of it, because DEI then got built into all of the systems. You're going to create a level of racism in the future that, again, that our generation had largely eliminated. So it's not that I needed him to agree with me on that. If his principle was just like, you know what, discrimination was so horrible in the past, and we have to discriminate in essence to move forward, I would disagree, but I would be like, all right, he fully thought it through. What I thought was interesting, and again, I really like the guy, so I don't even like saying this in a certain respect.
Do you like him for president, or do you just like him as a guy?
I don't think president would be the best position. What I would love to see him do, actually, would be that Trump would become president and he could become, I don't know, it would be attorney general, but he would basically be czar of destroying the agencies. He should be the one that goes in and blows apart the CDC and blows apart the NIH and maybe even things that he holds closely, like, you know, the EPA, things like that. Like all of the deep state, all of the eternal state stuff. I don't always like
the CIA.
CIA too. I mean, he's got some issues with the CIA. But if anyone was going to go in and knows these systems and has lived through these systems, I think he would be unbelievably good at that. Does he have the right temperament to work with Trump, or does Trump have the right temperament to actually select him? Who knows? I would say this: if it was not Joe Biden right now, and it was Kennedy, who, by the way, was running as a Democrat at the beginning, and the first day he announced, I said it on my show, you can find it. I said, he will not be a Republican by the end of this thing, but he will not be a Democrat. I promise you that. And I even said that to his face, and he was like, I should have known that. He has now seen the evil of the Democrat Party, and we're watching the evil of the Democrat Party burst forth right now in everything that's going on with Joe Biden.
Name the evil.
The evil, I would say, the simplest way to bumper stick it would be something like it will do anything to attain and retain power, period. And I would contrast that with the Republican Party, who, by the way, I always say it's like the giant made from Spaceballs. The Republicans blow and the Democrats suck. But like the Republican, or Peter Thiel has a great line on this. He always says we have a stupid party and an evil party. The evil party has become the Democrats, and the Republicans are just kind of stupid. But stupid you can work with. The Republicans, when Trump was the insurgent in 2015, and everybody was like, he's racist, he's a white supremacist, when that thing was really on steroids, the Republicans had a primary process. Nobody in the party did anything to stop Trump or change rules or anything else. Remember, it could have been Marco Rubio, it could have been Ted Cruz, it could have been Mike Huckabee, but they just ran their primary properly, and it was shocking to the party elite, the Bushes. It was shocking to all of the people that were, the Romney types and all of that, but they just ran their thing, and Trump won, and they played their game fair and square. The Democrats don't do that. Ask Bernie Sanders that same year how it went when he went against Hillary. They made sure the superdelegates and everybody else cut their deals to cut Bernie at the hip. Now, I despise Bernie and the socialist ideas that he's ushered in, and the fact that he's made it seem like that jealousy is a virtue, and all of the bad ideas of collectivism and all of that Bernie ushered in. But he did that through the Democrat Party, and they showed him what they care about, and they care about power. And I think what you're seeing right now, because the lies of what's going on in Biden's mind can't be covered up right now because it's so damn obvious, and the system hasn't figured out a way to respond to it yet. You're seeing a party that there is nothing they won't do to retain power. So whether that means they have to push Biden out, or they have to get him to the end, or they have to push out the first black female vice president, they will do what they have to do to attain power. And I think that is much more, that's why culturally things generally lean left. Like if you go in that direction, you will just keep going for power. Where conservative leaning people and classically liberal leaning people and libertarians, certainly, you lean more to the individual. You lean more to what I would say is innate human nature, that it's a little bit messy, that you and I think different things about the world, but we agree, like, I can't have your stuff, you can't have my stuff. We want to live in roughly the same place. And the Democrats, it's a much more hegemonic, authoritarian type rule. And the amount of destruction they can do over the next couple of months to retain that power, I think is going to be quite shocking.
Do you have if you were going to put your evil genius hat on and say, okay, this is what I would do if I want to ensure that I retain power, I'm the DNC, what advice would you give them?
There's horrible things you can do. You could make let's say there's two major wars happening in the world right now. There's a war with Israel and Gaza, and now unfortunately Hezbollah, which Lebanon's not a functioning country. So Hezbollah, which is an Iranian proxy, is basically at war with Israel in the north. You could just encourage more war. And then during wartime, and then of course Ukraine and Russia, you could create all of the conditions to basically be like, Ukraine, keep going as far as you can. We're going to keep giving you as much weapons. There's an odd not an asymmetry. There's a disconnect between the way Ukraine and the Israel thing are working out, because Ukraine, we can give them all the weapons in the world. They most likely cannot beat Russia because Russia has nukes. So unless you're going to nuke Russia, which by the way would have a nuclear response, like that thing's terrible. I think Israel has the reverse situation, which is they just need more weapons to end a war that actually could end. It's a finite war. But let's put that aside for a second. You could basically make those wars, and maybe even a China-Taiwan situation, very hot. And then it's the end of October, and people are like, holy shit, there's this war here, there's this war here. Oh, and by the way, suddenly there were 2 terrorist attacks in the United States, and just there will be so much chaos that the whole narrative will be, you cannot let evil chaos agent Donald Trump back in. We need old, steady, old man Joe Biden because we know what it is. It would be something like that. You just like sort of unleash lunacy, and then people will be like, please stay, something. I think it would be something like that. What do you think?
Interesting.
Like, I don't think it's as simple as just make the economy better. Let's put it that way.
If I'm putting on my evil genius hat.
Oh, right. That was the evil hat, right?
So the idea of continuing the forever wars, that feels like a totally different game to me. So if you want to steal from the poor and give to the rich, you keep doing that. So in fact, while we're here, let me do a quick PSA for people. This is utterly fascinating. I forget now who I heard this from. It's not me making this up. I have a feeling this is well-trod territory, but this is so fascinating. Once you understand how money printing works in conjunction with foreign wars, and one little caveat, you understand why money printing is absolutely devastating to the poor and middle class, far more than it is to wealthy people. So here's how it goes. I think this is utterly fascinating, and this is why the reason that I have such a hard time with Biden having diminished cognitive capacity is I already think that the deep state, and I do think that is the right word, managerial class does not get at what I fear is really happening. I am always open to disconfirming evidence, but my gut instinct now with the little bit of research I've done. So the way that this works is that you're going to effectively allow the deep state to grow more powerful by doing the following. You are going to print money to fund these forever wars. The reason you do it by printing money is it is a way to tax the American people without actually having to ask their permission. It's a way to get involved in a war without having to go to Congress and ask for their permission. So now all of a sudden, these people who you did not elect are able to do things, AKA print the money, which is it's ultimately very simple, but it's hard for people to wrap their minds around, including me. But the way printing money works goes like this. You are counterfeiting money, but the government is doing it, so we don't prosecute them. But it is the same act. The same reason that you would hate it if your neighbor were printing $1 billion in his backyard is exactly why you should hate it when the government does it. Because you are devaluing what the dollar does. Now, explaining why that's true, why it isn't one for one is where the complexity comes from. But if you will accept that when you print more money, you devalue the money that already exists. So if you have $100 in your bank account, I'm not taking any of the 100, but through this sort of magic trick, I am causing the $100 to only buy you $90 worth of goods or $80 worth of goods, depending on how fast I'm going at this. Then what I do with that buying power that I just siphoned from the American people without having to ask for their permission is I go and I fund these wars. Now, when I fund the wars, I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to give you, dear country, whatever country we may be talking about, I'm going to give you this money, but you have to buy your munitions, your weapons from American manufacturers. Now, watch how that sleight of hand just worked, everybody. You had money taken, buying power, robbed from your bank account, sent technically overseas, but the money comes back to American contractors. So if you're one of those American contractors, you just got richer. If you own stock in one of those companies, you just got richer. So you siphon from the entire taxable citizenry, but only benefit a few. It is insane. Now, who's the person in that apparatus that you can point to? You can't. It's next to impossible to point to a single person. If you really want to get freaked out, and shout out to RFK Jr., he's the one that told me to read this book. But there's a book called JFK and the Unspeakable. And it's a very dense book about how and why JFK was assassinated. Now, if somebody can show me that this book is total hogwash, I'm here for it, because you might actually be able to restore my faith that the deep state doesn't control as much as I fear. But reading that book, I was like, oh my God, there are people just up and down everywhere where the incentives are just aligned. And so
that's what a conspiracy is. It's aligned. Well, that's why I said earlier that it wouldn't then a mind-muddled 80-year-old career politician for 50 years be the perfect person to be ushering in this managerial class deep state situation. He's not really anything. It's governing by committee, which now they're saying, oh, at 5 o'clock, other people do things and he's around great people. So the buck stops with nobody. It's just an endless thing for the system. I'll I'll add another layer of what you just described that I think is also deeply, deeply disturbing, which is, so we print the money. So now the money is worth less. So the average person now is just able to buy less groceries, let's say. Okay, that's fine. That's one thing. But now, as you said, we give it to these countries. So Israel's a really interesting. I'm a huge Israel supporter, but what we are doing to Israel is actually evil. We have made them completely dependent on us. So every dollar that we give them, we don't give them it's exactly what you just described. They have to spend that money on our weapon systems here. Some of them they help design, but basically it's a subsidy for the military industrial complex. But then what we've done is we've taken an independent country and made them less independent. And now we have an actual incentive to keep them in war forever, which I think is actually what's happening right now. They can end this war if they have the proper weapons and they basically have some cover for the not troops or anything like that, but just some cover from the US. But instead, the system itself basically has realized, we can actually keep them in perpetual war. Why wouldn't we keep them in perpetual war? How is it that we went from wrapping up Afghanistan, which was the longest war in United States history, that no one was really sure why we were there in the first place, because Afghanistan had largely nothing to do with 9/11. And then basically within months, Ukraine started. And then when everyone started getting frustrated with Ukraine, next thing you know, there's a war in the Middle East. So I'm completely with you on that, all of that. But the part that I'm adding is that it's also destroying the sovereignty of other nations when they basically are completely reliant on us for defense. Every nation should be reliant on itself. I think a lot of countries are learning that right now.
Yeah. Okay. So, who do you think ultimately RFK benefits or hurts?
So that's a great question. And I think you can probably argue it both ways. I would say that I'll try to do it both ways, and then maybe you can be the judge of what you think. So I think the way he hurts Trump is that because he's been particularly good on COVID, meaning really, for your own choice, and he's been anti-vax and all of that stuff, the base of MAGA hates all that stuff. Their main gripe with Trump is warp speed, handing too much power to Fauci, Birx, blah, blah, blah. So if that segment of people, whatever percentage that is, if they're just really pissed at Trump over that and still willing to vote on that, then they'll vote JFK. They're certainly not voting for Biden, right? Biden was worse on all of those things. And Biden did mandates and was far worse on COVID. And wanted, literally was trying to force people to get a vaccine that was not a vaccine and all that. So whatever percentage of that Trump base is still seriously pissed about COVID, they could go to RFK. My gut feeling is it hurts Biden more because since RFK is a little bit more of a traditional liberal, say a liberal of 30 years ago that we used to know of, Ed Koch and Daniel Patrick Moynihan and Mario Cuomo, and the list goes on and on. They used to call them blue dog Democrats in the middle of the country, just more moderate Democrats. And that's what RFK at least partially represents. You could see a lot of that type. It's probably our parents' generation more than us, that type of Democrat being like, you know what? The progressives are kind of nuts. They, the AOCs and everybody else, we voted for Biden because Biden was supposed to be the firewall against them. And that's really how they sold us Biden. If you remember, when everybody dropped out, it was like, they're not going to hand it to the crazies right now, Bernie and Elizabeth Warren and all the socialists. Biden is just old, trusty Joe Biden. Well, I think a lot of people with the immigration thing particularly could be like, you know what? Biden clearly failed on that. We're looking at the cognitive stuff, dementia or whatever, Parkinson's, whatever it might be. So we're going to vote for RFK. So my gut feeling is he hurts RFK more. And by the way, I would also say that the Democrats knew that, which is exactly why they made it impossible for him to run as a Democrat and then have, in essence, tried to destroy him through media, hit pieces and everything else.
Yeah, it's interesting to...
What do you think?
Well, so I don't know if I know enough about the polling to have an official answer, but what I found interesting is the polling numbers that RFK put out there. He said in a head-to-head, Trump beats Biden. In a three-way, he wins over both of them. Sorry, if he goes against Trump, he wins. If he goes against Biden, he wins. It's only when all three of them are there that he starts then being polling really low. And so I have a feeling that he is going to steal from your independent voters, depending on where Biden is polling. I mean, right now, I think Biden's so low, it's just effectively assured that Trump would win. So the question becomes, who's he a bigger spoiler for? Almost certainly Trump, if Biden is either replaced or he gets his numbers back up. That would be my gut instinct, because if it were closer like it was before between Biden and Trump, now you have to win over the independents. And I think RFK pulls independence, just pure gut instinct.
Yeah.
If people want to feel like me in terms of, I want a vision of optimism, I want to see somebody talk about the debt. Like, I'm effectively a single issue voter.
Yeah.
And so he's the only one that I hear talking about the debt, talking about the need to balance the deficit, talking about, this is probably a bit Pollyanna, but I like the vibe of it, where he says, if somebody is caught lying to the American people, somebody in government is caught lying to the American people, I'll have them fired. Just adjudicating what is a lie is already going to be tough.
Yeah.
But
directionally,
I get the sentiment. And so that is one of those where, okay, again, just an outsider, I'm an alien, I come down, I visit. I would have to really stop. In fact, let me steelman this and see if I can figure it out, because my instinct is to not understand why Trump and Biden are so popular. Okay, so looking at it, it goes like this. This is my off the cuff assessment of what I think is going on, but I am literally thinking through this for the first time. Social media and algorithms fuel an innate desire that we all have for tribalism. So you don't blame social media. That's a mistake. Social media is simply responding to the incentives that the human animal has. Humans want to be tribal. And the more, like, as an on-air personality, you become very aware that the more aggressive and in one camp you can be, the more views and clicks you get. And so for me, it is this constant, like, I have to remind myself, what is my actual value system, and gravitate around that, even though I know, hey, if I just skewed one direction or the other,
it's honorable and it's hard. I try the best I can, and I have no doubt I have blind spots in that, but all you can do is try. Yeah.
For sure. So the DNC, though, does appear to have leaned way, way, way into that. So tribalism all day, every day. Now, Trump do I think he intentionally leans into tribalism? I'm not familiar with Trump enough to know if the answer to that question is yes or no. From the things that I've seen, his personality makes him a lightning rod. I don't know if he's trying, though. I think there's just something about the way that he acts that drives people nuts. So there is a reaction to him that amplifies the already sort of tribal vibes over here. So you've got the DNC, who actively pursues breaking people up into these identitarian groups. You've got Trump, who just exacerbates that, who talks fast and loose, and who is... It's interesting. I don't know enough about Trump to understand the positive reaction to Trump, but it's I feel seen, the system is rigged, it's all against me, things are bad, he finally stands up for me, that thing. But then when I look at RFK, that feels more like an accurate representation of, hey, let me show you what's actually broken. Let me show you a positive way to get out of this. Let's talk about the fiscal debt. Okay, so now I actually understand Trump. Thank you all for letting me talk. Trump is doing what RFK is doing, but from an emotional place. And so I can be all limbic. That makes sense. DNC, tribes, Trump, limbic, the system is broken and I'm here to save you. I'm your asshole. And then RFK is reasoned. RFK is fucked. That will never work.
Well, I don't know that it'll never work, but I don't think that within what we have right now, it doesn't work. Right? We need something more to break. I don't know exactly what that is before.
Meaning more suffering?
Well, hopefully not more suffering, but
what do you mean by break?
I would say we need more of the system as we've described it so far to not be working properly or be properly exposed until people can get to the more reasonable side of things.
How do we break it without suffering?
No, so you probably can't, right? Like, so if people would say, like, what would really get America to reset? Well, you sort of asked this already, but in essence, it would be like, it's probably only horrible things. Like it seems very unlikely, short of aliens coming down and offering us something that is unknown. Maybe that'll happen. But short of that happening, it seems very unlikely that any reset to realizing how good it is here, how precious and rare it is and everything else. It seems like it could only happen after a horrific tragedy. I lived in New York City during 9/11. I was 21. I was there for it. My dad saw the second plane hit from his office in Midtown. Like, I was around all that. And there was something that was happening in New York City, but not just New York City. There was something that was happening in the entire country at that time, realizing like why America is so precious and what freedom means and all of those things for all of her flaws and all the stuff that you always have to say with that. I don't know that something good could happen that would unite us again. Like, we're not going to the moon anymore. I don't know, maybe Elon will get us to Mars and something so spectacular will happen that we'll all be like, put aside all of this nonsense. We found other life out there. But usually we seem, unfortunately, now to respond only to horrific tragedies. And by the way, even those tragedies, partly because of the way we behave with social media, even the tragedies rip us apart now. So, a horrific shooting will happen. And, like the Uvalde, Texas shooting, 20 kids shot in a school, elementary school. And immediately on social media, we're all going to our own corners on that. And it's like, man, for a second, can we realize that 27-year-olds were killed before we're screaming about, you have AOC on one hand, get the guns, and the other people on the other side, like. So I don't know that we can ever be reset out of this thing without something horrible happening, which is you don't even want to speak that. But I completely agree with your overriding premise, which is that RFK, he's talking about something that we need to get back to one way or another. Maybe we can't get back to it nationally. Maybe the only way we can get back to it is personally, individually, community-wise, maybe a little bit on the state side. Again, Florida's doing a lot of those things right. But maybe the national thing now is so big, it's so broken, it's such a Godzilla that cannot be managed. It's just a giant Godzilla standing in a china shop, and if it moves any way, it's going to break everything. That all you can want out of it is for it to have less power, which, by the way, would be something that the founders would be pretty into. The idea that if the founders were looking at this thing right now, being like, first off, seeing the two personalities, seeing the cognitive stuff and everything else, but that's not even it. If they were looking at it going, look at what these idiots did with this incredible setup that we gave them, the setup that would free all of them, and look what they are debating about and the amount of control they have given over their autonomy and over the economic system and everything else, they would be blown. They would all be rolling over in their graves.
What would they point out? What would be the thing that they said, oof, I can't believe you messed that one up?
I mean, there's so much. First off, the whole purpose of the founding of the country was we did not want to be ruled by a king. Like, that's the most simple bumper sticker version. We didn't want taxation without representation. They wanted people basically to live their lives as they saw fit. You would have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We're going to have some property laws. We're going to make sure the states aren't warring with each other. But they wanted the states to be very, very different. That was the beauty of federalism. It's, again, why I can always sing the praises of Florida, because I feel like I live in a place that still is abiding by much of what America was set up by. And that is so different than when I land here just last night. I land in Los Angeles, and I, in some ways, feel like I'm landing in another country. I really do, which is a very weird thing. And it's funny, my producer who's sitting right here, we landed, he turns his phone off airplane mode, and it said we landed in Mexico. He had the roaming rate for Mexico, which I just thought was like kind of hilarious. Like in it.
Weird.
Yeah. Mexico has a lot more freedom, by the way, for the most part, than California, although Mexico does have some of its own problems. But
hold on. Are you saying you would rather, from a freedom perspective, you'd rather be in Mexico than California?
Certain parts of Mexico, let's say.
Get specific. Which parts?
I think you could probably be in a lot of parts of like Jalisco, where they're mostly making tequila, which I was just at, it's kind of like the gangs aren't there. I'm not sitting here telling you everything's great in Mexico. But there's a lot of places in Mexico that you can live and not be like taxed into oblivion and have some land and be okay.
But is that the grass is
greener? But that really wasn't
side?
where I was going with this.
Yes, I know. But
I don't want to live. I don't want to live anywhere than the United States. Like, I'm not going anywhere. I know a lot of people that are closer to your level of wealth than my level of wealth that are always like trying to figure out, where can I go after this, or it's going to collapse and I have to be on an island or in a secret bunker or blah, blah. I'm not going anywhere. I love this country. I fought very hard when I lived in California, especially during the COVID years, to get rid of Gavin Newsom and for the recall and everything else. I got audited by the state 3 days after the recall. Like, think about that. And that was the day I put my house for sale. I was gone in 2 months. What I realized was, in those 2 years, I fought very hard, but I was fighting against the system. What I love about being in Florida now, this is a little bit of a jump from where we started here, but what I love about being in Florida now is I'm fighting for something. Every day in Florida, I feel like I'm fighting for something, and I see the results of it. When you go around and you see businesses opening everywhere, you see roads being built everywhere, you don't see homelessness or drugs anywhere, really anywhere. It's not to say that it's nowhere, of course. There are things. There's no perfect system. But when you see a place that it functions properly, that the police department is funded properly and, they're allowed to do their work. Did you see in Tampa a couple months ago? I think this is like my favorite Florida story. Some guy broke into somebody's house somewhere in Tampa and the guy shot him. And it was as simple as that. He shot him. He was breaking in. He was there to just rob the home. He shot him. That was it. The police chief goes on TV giving the press conference and he's like, I just want to thank Mr. Whatever for shooting him because he not only did the right thing, protecting himself and his family, but he made our job easier. And it was like, whoa, that was it. It wasn't that complex. The guy, you have the Second Amendment, you have a right to protect your life, liberty, pursuit, and happiness, and you have a right to protect your family and all that. And it was like, so you actually, by doing your job as an individual, protecting yourself, you actually strengthen the system because then the police officer did not have to do something. And then that makes more people. One of the other things that's happened as the red and blue have gone their own ways, all these police officers in New York City Police Department, which would have been, I think, the world's third largest army at one time a couple of years ago. All of these guys now, and I know many of them from living in New York, they've retired early. So you got the old guys, the old New York City police officers, like from the sitcom or from like the dramas of 1980s and 90s. They've retired because they don't want anything to do with it anymore because the administration doesn't back them. And then some of the ones that are a little closer to our age, not quite at retirement age, they're moving down to Florida because they're like, oh, wait, I could be a police officer in Florida where the administration will back me and I'm not going to be told I'm a racist. Oh, and if some Antifa thug hits me in the head with a bat or throws a Molotov cocktail at me, I'm actually not going to get in trouble. They'll get in trouble. So the system is sorting itself right now, which is quite good. And I think the founders would be very happy about that.
It's interesting, and I would like to get back to some of the things that the founders would care deeply about, because I think that we're playing with some things there that we don't necessarily understand the second and third order consequences. But first, I want to talk about, I saw that press conference or whatever that they put out where the guy was like, thank you for shooting him. There is something in the reputation that Florida is gaining, I think probably for good reason. It just feels callous. So while I get it, and let me tell you, if you break into my house with ill intent, 1,000%, you should be able to shoot that person and shoot to kill. Let me be abundantly clear. But if I got put in that position, I would be crestfallen that I had to do that. Now, I would not hesitate. I would not be the person who's like, I couldn't pull the trigger.
Well, I don't think most people
if you're
would be
coming
thrilled.
After my family, bro, guns ablazing.
Yeah.
But at the end of that, I'm not going to give a cocky John Wayne speech. I'm going to be like, fuck, this sucked. Like, I am mortified that I had to take a human life. And so for them to be like, thanks, you did our job. It's like, that's the kind of shit that winds people up, where they're like, dude, I could be with you if you could take a sensible approach, but when it almost feels like trolling at
Okay, so I think that's probably our first like fundamental disagreement here, which is good. Let's dive into that. See, first off, I understand where that's coming from with you. Like, that's coming from like deep inside your heart. You don't want a human to die. You weren't happy about that and all that. I think all of that goes without saying. Like, it's true, it's real, it's everything else. Like, if God forbid that happened to me and I had to do that to another human being and all of that stuff, I certainly would not be thrilled in anything else. But I would be happy that the system acknowledged someone is allowed to protect themselves and do the right thing. And if it has to flaunt it a little bit, I think a little bit of the flaunting is part of the defense mechanism. Florida has just made it clear. You are not, when we had even 2 months ago, a bunch of the Hamas people ran out and they were blocking the roads in Orlando to Disney, which made absolutely no sense, but nothing they're really doing is making sense. They were there for 11 minutes. And then within 11 minutes, Florida State Troopers, Orlando local police dispersed everybody. Has not happened again. Now, you might say, but they're impeding on their free speech and all that. Well, you can't close roads. People get confused about a lot of that stuff. You might have caused someone's grandma to die because an ambulance can't get by and all that stuff. But the point is, I am for the whatever percentage you want to put on that, for the cockiness about it, or that maybe DeSantis occasionally came off as a little cold as it related to reversing DEI. I'm not taking that position, but if that would be your position or someone else's position, that simply doesn't matter to me. I think some of that is probably like you either are ruled by the heart or the brain. And I think the best way to be ruled is by like the tightest combination of both. And none of us are perfect at that. But when things are working, you want people to know that they're working. And if you need to strut it a little bit, if you have to show the peacock in his full feathers a little bit, I actually think that's okay. Because the other version of that is we're just kind of weak. You know, we walked by just today here in LA, we walked by a CVS and I was like, it would be funny. I could actually walk into CVS. We could live stream it on YouTube on my phone right now. I could walk into CVS and just steal deodorant, just one stick of deodorant, not $800 worth of stuff, but I could just live stream it and just say, hey, everybody, I'm here in Los Angeles and I needed a deodorant. So here I am. I'm stealing Old Spice or Degree or whatever. And nobody's going to stop me. Can't do anything. Have a nice day. Nothing would happen. That is not right. That is not right, but they will not do anything about it here. Guess what? It does not happen in Florida. You walk into a Lululemon and try to steal a Lululemon, which I'm specifically saying because the owner at one time, or the CEO basically was like, yeah, if you steal stuff from our store, it's okay because we'll work it out or we'll write it off or whatever. It's like, no one's going to do that in Florida because you know what? You try to do that in Florida and maybe you get out of the store, but maybe someone right outside shoots you because of concealed carry. So there is something to be said about a place that not only is doing it right, but kind of shows that it's doing it right. I'm not talking Wild West, start blowing everybody's brains out, but I think you need I think what you're expressing maybe is a little bit of like the empathy. Maybe it's the empathy part that's like going a little bit above what I would say is the necessary reality part. And by the way, I'm empathetic to that too, because I want the world to be nice and decent and everything else. But I think there's a lot of people ready to take advantage of that.
Yeah. So this is my temperament.
Yeah.
So I get it. I understand that this is great marketing, but this is also the kind of thing that pushes people into tribes. So if I might, I'm going to speech right here for said gentleman. And I would just say, hey, totally get the vibe we're going for here, captain or chief.
Yeah.
But let's just tweak one sentence and say, we stand by our citizens' right to protect their homes, and we will always stand by people that defend themselves, even if it means a fatal shooting. But every shooting is a tragic loss of life, and our hearts go out to the suspect's parents, or whatever the right word is at that point.
I bet you probably got that. I bet if we watch the full unedited thing, I can't
that
swear
would be
to
amazing.
it. I bet
I'm reacting to what I heard
We're doing
here.
the bumper sticker version, yeah.
Correct. So yeah, I get it. And look, I think it was somebody in Texas where the guy he stands out front and all of his guys are flanking behind him in a V formation, all holding weapons. And they've got some speech about, hey, we heard about these guys that are planning to roll up or whatever with their guns. And if you want to do that in our town, I'm just telling you right now, you're going to get shot. Mm-hmm. That, because it isn't in reference to somebody who actually died. It's a warning. It's true, just marketing. That one doesn't bother me. And so I'm not a prude on this. I'm just saying, hey, I would really like to see people dial the temperature down on the division. Now, I'm curious because I know you, one, just in this exchange, you see it slightly differently. And then two, while I love that states can all run their own experiment, I am legitimately concerned about national divorce. That does not strike me as the path we want to go down. But I'm curious, do you think national divorce solves a lot of our problems? And hey, everybody, don't worry. Just like run to the state that best represents you and call it a day.
So I've only discussed this on my show a couple of times, and I think in one or two other interviews off my show, because this is one of those things that I don't like talking about yet because I don't want to speak it into existence. You know what I mean? It's one of those things we all start having this conversation, and the next thing you know, legislatures and states are doing different things and everything else. I would prefer, so my bumper sticker, I would prefer the United States remain the United States of America. The problem we're having right now is what unites us. What unites California and Florida now? Not much. First off, we got about 3,000 miles between us. But then ideologically and how the states function is wildly different. It would be one thing if this was, again, sort of where we grew up, or just think back to 1995. That's the year I always want to like take everything back to. It would be one thing if it was like, this state has a marginal tax rate of 7%. This one has 2%. This one has legalized marijuana. This one doesn't, or this one has recreational, and this one. Like if it was basics, sort of simple stuff that we were disagreeing on, then I think the system could operate properly. And that's how it operated for a long time, right? Colorado had legalized weed earlier than, I think it was the first state to have legalized weed, if I'm not mistaken. And they got to see the results of that. By the way, a lot of people in Colorado aren't so thrilled with the results of that. And I'm largely for the legalization of marijuana. But it does come with secondary effects. I mean, go to New York City right now and every single street corner smells like weed. That I actually think over time that's not great for a society. But what's happened now is it's not just about tax rates or whether weed should be legal. It's become about completely opposing diametrically opposite ideas. The idea that DEI should be in the system. So I would argue that DEI is institutional racism. I don't want it in the system. So here in California, it is in the system. The state can hire people based on color of skin, based on gender identity and everything else. Florida, we have obliterated that. We have gone back to a meritocracy in terms of hiring our professionals and our police and educators and all of that thing. That idea alone is so profoundly different in these two places that I don't know how you bring those things together. So I'm not for national divorce. Well, let's put it this way. If Joe Biden or the managerial class that he represents, or that whole thing that we did in the first half of this conversation, if that thing wins again, then I don't see how America gets out of any of these problems that we have right now. I think we are in it. It will keep getting worse and worse and worse. They'll print the high hell out of it. The wars will continue. All of the woke stuff as far as racism that will be just pushed into the system and the gender confusion, it will all get worse and worse. Not everywhere. There will be it will be a little bit better in Florida. It'll be a little bit better in Texas. But I would say largely at that point, I would be very bullish on Florida and very bearish on the rest of the country. I would say, Florida, you know what? I live in a state that is a peninsula, that is, we have our own Coast Guard. We can make sure that people can't just show up on boats. And we have a border with Georgia and a little border with Louisiana, I think. And it's like, we can protect that pretty easily. And maybe that is what we should do. So that's basically where I would be at. That it's not national. The real problem with national divorce is that let's say 15 red states all align together. The blue states will never let them go. That's the problem, because the ideology that we talked about earlier, this collectivist socialist ideology that has taken over the Democrat Party, it wants total control. If you said to the average Texan, hey, you could just have nothing to do with greater America anymore. You could still visit, you can get on a plane and go and whatever, but that's kind of it. I think the average Texan would be for that. I think the average Floridian would be for that. At least ideologically, maybe not in terms of how exactly you're going to break the thing or anything. I don't like the idea of this, but I think at some point it is the break in case of emergency thing that we have in the States. It's the last thing that we have to protect anything that's somewhat normal.
How often are you checking your credit score, afraid of identity theft or account breaches? We all use the internet every single day for important things like personal banking and remote work, so why not protect yourself with our sponsor, Aura? Aura is an all-in-one cybersecurity service that keeps you safe online. Aura identifies data brokers exposing your info and submits opt-out requests on your behalf. Aura also monitors your credit, tracks your passwords for data breaches, and secures your online activity with VPN and anti-malware protection. You can try Aura for free for 2 weeks by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code. If you want to have a solid strategy in place to grow your business, you need to have a very clear and accurate picture of the business finances as your starting point. But managing finances has historically been a tedious and time-consuming task that very few entrepreneurs want to make time for or even have time for. Now, however, you can revolutionize the way you manage your business finances with QuickBooks, the #1 accounting software for small businesses. Bookkeeping with QuickBooks is easy, with one place to track expenses and inventory, organize and manage bills, send invoices, calculate tax and deductions, and compare projects for profitability. And with QuickBooks Payroll, you can streamline payday, track time, manage HR, and offer team benefits. So discover why 88% of customers say QuickBooks helps their business be more successful and save yourself time by bundling bookkeeping and payroll. Just click the link below to get 50% off 3 months of QuickBooks Payroll. Try it today.
Are you saying that if Biden got elected in 24, that you would campaign for the cessation of Florida?
I would be on that side of the argument if the argument presented itself. Yeah.
Okay, walk me.
I don't know that I want to lead that movement, but I would be for it. It would present itself. Let's put it that way. If Biden wins again and suddenly they're just like, yes, now 10 more million people will come in over the next 4 years. And all of these bad ideas will just keep pushing. And the Department of Education will get bigger and keep teaching kids the wrong thing. It's not tenable. You can't teach generations of kids that America's evil and founded on racism and all of these things. You can't teach it. We're seeing the results of that. You know, on July 4th, when you see at the steps of the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, that should be the most proud place on July 4th to celebrate the 248 years. And we're 48 years old. So it was 200. America turned 200 on our birthing year. It should be the most proud place in the world that day. And they're burning American flags and waving Palestinian flags. That can't last for very long. So I would be for a movement that would want nothing to do with that.
Okay, so what are the big things you're trying to protect Florida from in that case that you couldn't already do with states' rights?
Well, the big one would be immigration. And there might be ways that you wouldn't have to secede. And again, I'm very leery of talking about this. I just think there's a weird energy thing around it. But if the governor of Florida was not given, he has the right. If any particular governor of a state would then do what they have to do to either expand their National Guard or create some new vertical or whatever to make sure that their border to me is number one. That is the number one thing. Biden should be impeached or at least not be president for the border, if nothing else. Forget all the cognitive stuff. There's very few responsibilities that the executive branch has. You know what I mean? Like to do the basic stuff, like the Congress writes the laws and the president signs them into law, and then the judicial branch decides if they're legal. That's basically how it works. The president isn't supposed to be striking the pen with all of these executive actions all day, figuring out what the laws are. We've just outsourced all of it to the executive branch. Again, the founders would be extremely disappointed by that because this is exactly what they left in the first place, right? So I would be for the states having. You don't want closed borders. Of course, in a functioning society, you want to be able to drive through. I've driven across the country. You've probably driven across the country at some point.
Not the whole thing.
Have you never done it? It's wonderful. It's one of the things I recommend to everybody. You should do it once in your life. Just drive across this country once. 3,000 miles. Do it in 5 or 6 days. And just see the expanse and the natural beauty of this country and hear the different dialects and accents and all that. It's just one of the most wonderful things you could do. So it's not like I like the idea of that when you cross over from Florida to Georgia, you're going to have to go through a border like you were going through to Canada. But I think the states have a right to make sure that the things that they believe in are protected. The people of Florida have basically the OG Florida guy. It was the joke of 20 years ago on the internet. It was like one of the first meme jokes. Florida man does this. Florida man does that. Florida man smokes meth and wrestles an alligator and saves a child. And Florida man was right about a lot of something. And I think the people of Florida have every right to protect that. So you'd have to do what you need to do to protect that. And by the way, I would say that California has well within its right to do that too.
Yeah.
Of course. I mean, I think that goes without saying.
Okay. So what is the specific problem with unchecked immigration? What does it do, boots on the ground?
I mean, the simple answer to that is like, you don't have a country if you don't know who's in your country. You have some kind of amorphous blob, but you do not have a country.
Would it solve your problem then if we documented everybody coming across?
Well, I still would be for limiting it. You have to pick there's a couple problems. I mean, first off, they tell us we have about 12 million illegals before the last 3 years. So if it's about 7 that have come in now, there's about 20 million people that are undocumented right now, right? That's a problem in and of itself. If you have people that kind of exist outside of the system but are in the system or a part or like ancillarily touching the system, it's just not how a system could work, because then you have obviously the people who are in the system paying for those people and all of the services. We now see what's happening in sanctuary cities. I mean, you should go next time. I don't recommend anyone go to New York City, but next time you go to New York City, go to Roosevelt Hotel. I was there a couple weeks ago. It was one of the most iconic hotels in New York City, kind of like the other Waldorf Astoria. You go there, it's a migrant shelter. There's just children. There's just children out on the streets in front of the hotel. And then there's a lot of people in hoodies and everyone looks kind of shady. It's like, what is going on there? It's barricaded. It's not a hotel anymore. It's a refugee center in essence. That's not how it's supposed to be. Again, it's the same thing as why you can walk into CVS in LA and just steal whatever you want. And you can't do that in Florida. They've just decided rules and things don't matter. So the other part of this is, the line Andrew Breitbart used to say that politics is downstream from culture, right? So I would say that everything is downstream from immigration. If you just don't know who is in your country, what do they roughly believe? Why are they here? Like, are they obeying the laws? Are they here to upend everything, to commit crime, to create gangs? And you won't have a country for very long. So ironically, for all of the stuff that we think is the problem with the border right now, I think it could all be far worse, and we have no idea. We have no idea who's in this country. It only took about, 21 men and 3 masterminds to do 9/11. Like, I don't know, if about 10 million people are in this country right now in the last couple of years, I think a couple of them have bad ideas. So, yes, Hungary has a closed border, period. It is extremely hard to become Hungarian.
A lot of people though think that the president of Hungary sounds like a lunatic.
I mean, I simply don't. Yes, a lot of people do think that. I've met him. I met him at the presidential palace. We talked for about 20 minutes. What he repeatedly said over and over was that he loves his country. He loves his country and he loves his people. Now, I'm not going to tell you that I know everything about him, but I don't think he's a racist. Ironically, I met the chief rabbi of Hungary, of Budapest. There's about, I think, 100 or maybe 150,000 Jews in Hungary. They will be the safest Jews in all of Europe. It's not going to be in France or in the UK where they're going to let the Islamists and jihadists just rampage through the streets all the time. It's going to be in the place that is thought of as the most far right and like Nazi white supremacist something. That's where the Jews of Europe will be able to live. Because he believes that Jews should be Hungarians like everything else. He just doesn't want his borders to be overrun by people who are not Hungarians. And until all of us realize that is how we have to behave. These are serious problems. Why is it that everyone still wants to come here and nobody leaves? Nobody leaves America. Everyone still wants to come. There is a reason. But at some point, if you let everyone in, then you're not America. You're just
What do you think the reason
the rest
is?
of the world.
Why do people want to come to America?
Because believe it or not, we still have opportunity. We still have that dream.
So it's economic.
It's largely economic, but it's economic, but then it's connected to something I would say existential. So it's economic in like the most literal sense. So if you live somewhere that's not great, you look at America and you still see the flashiness of America and you still see the movies of America and the TV of America and all the cool and the sports of America and all that cool stuff. That's like the initial thing, but then it's much deeper than that once you realize what creates that. What creates that is the engine of freedom. What creates that is that our founders set up a system that anyone could come here as long as you did it legally and you have a chance. And what better system could there be than that? But you can't let everyone in to partake in that because some people will not be for that. Some people will gladly shred that. And I think we actually have now members of Congress that are largely against that don't like the founding documents in the first place and everything else. So I don't know it would be a waste of time for us to sit here and be like, well, how many people can come in and what does the exact border look like and all of that kind of stuff.
Why would that be a waste of time?
Well, I mean, it would be a waste of time for the two of us to just, I guess we could.
Because we don't know what we're talking about?
Yeah. I don't think we have enough information, like how many border crossings there are a day and everything else. But if a serious politician here, RFK, who you obviously like a lot, one of the most amazing things that's happened in the last year is that RFK, if you look at most of his career, rarely talked about immigration at all. Then he went to the border. Did you see that video that he did where he's basically with the selfie video he goes down, I think it was in Arizona, maybe it was in Texas, I'm not sure. So someone can fact check me on this and I have no doubt the internet will, but he's standing there doing a selfie video and he's at a broken spot at the border wall. And he's like, I didn't know what I was coming down here to see, but I am absolutely shocked. He said there are people, and he listed like 20 countries that people were coming from, and he could not believe it. And then he noted, and I've discussed this with him after, that why is it all men? It's basically all men, 25 to 40, fighting age. Where are the women? Where are the huddled masses? Where are the grandmas? Your grandparents or great-grandparents that came here? It wasn't just dudes that were 25 that came here. So there is something else happening right now. And the more of us that realize that, if we just realize it, it's not racist to realize that. That has nothing to do with race. I simply don't, I would it's just so nonsensical to talk about within the prism of race. But they've made it so that immigration is all about race. I'll tell you, I live in Miami. It's largely a Hispanic population, and Miami's largely Cuban and Venezuelan and everything else. I play basketball a couple times a week with, I think it's about 25 guys. I'm pretty sure 23 of them are Hispanic of some version. There's probably me and one other white guy that play, and there's one black guy. They are all Trump supporters. And not only are they all Trump supporters, they're all rabid Trump supporters. They don't want illegal immigration. Their parents came here, again, many from Cuba. They did it right. They've made a good life for themselves. They don't want to just give that away. So, and by the way, you're also seeing that in a lot of the Texas border towns, that they are now they're Hispanic, but they are becoming the most stringent on the border, because the media doesn't care when the Texas El Paso airport gets overrun with illegal immigrants, but suddenly you send 20 of them up to Martha's Vineyard and Barack Obama's 30-acre estate might have an illegal on it. Well, shit, we better do something about that.
Can you steelman the people that want the open border?
So I think there's two types of people that want an open, probably three types. So the easiest type is there's just some people that it's not that they want it or don't want it. They just don't think about things seriously. And they're just like, oh, it's America. Anyone can come. That's like, and I don't know what percentage that is. That's like the person that's not thinking. I think the two types that are thinking about it are, one is partly probably a lot of type of people that you've been around in tech and everything else, is like the more libertarian person that in general doesn't really believe in borders, believes that economics kind of drives everything and we just need more workforce. So you hear a lot of this from like the big tech guys. They just kind of want more people. That I'm somewhat sympathetic to that argument. The problem is you need skilled people to fill a certain set of jobs. You can't just have like, 50 Chinese nationalists just come in and you have no idea what they know or what they believe or why they're here. So I think something with the libertarian version of this, I just find is generally naivete. It's like, yes, it would be nice if everyone could come here and make a good life for themselves, but like, it's kind of not how it's not how human nature works. That's one version. And then I would say the other version is the much scarier version. The other version is what I would say at this point the Rashida Tlaib or Ilhan Omar version is, or some of the more nefarious members of Congress and the media, I would say, which is that they genuinely are trying to upend the United States, that they are not proud of this country. You just have to listen to them. You don't have to listen to me. Read the 1619 Project, that this country was founded on racism. It's not good that we're an imperialist project. Israel is the appetizer for these guys, but the U.S. is the big fish. So those are the ones that I'm really concerned about. The libertarians who, and libertarians generally don't have that much power. And by the way, I'm almost all libertarian in ideas. It's just that I believe in some level of guardrails around that, like just some level. Otherwise, we'd all be in Mad Max, which is kind of fun intellectually. And I really did. Yeah, it's fun to think about. Could we really just like shred every freaking thing and have Thunderdome to solve all our problems? Yes, I can get on board that. But
strikes me as a horrifying idea.
I just could get on it for my fun
it
80s
is a fun movie.
Yes.
But I'm very glad.
Yes, no, we should not be living in Bartertown. Although I did like Tina Turner running that city; it was pretty awesome back then. So it's some combination of like the libertarians, we just want workforce here, which by the way ends up keeping like a constant underclass. So I think there's some weird issue there.
It's interesting. Do you think that is the permanent underclass is a result of people just cannot get out of it, or is there something broken in a system that should otherwise help people up a ladder?
Well, I think the easiest example, which we could connect to this administration, is, as I said before, the two things that because I'm not as economically versed as you are, and I'm not an economist and everything else, the two things I always look at are price of groceries and interest rates. Mm-hmm. To me, interest rates, so everyone understands if eggs are more, okay, and you can buy less eggs. But interest rates, the idea that at one time in America, not too long ago, only about 7 years ago, you could get a mortgage rate for, say, 2.75%. In essence, that allowed me, and I bought two houses in that period, right? That allowed me to basically go to the bank and say, hey, I'd like to buy something. You will lend me some money, and then I'll pay you a little something every month. And then hopefully the thing that I bought will raise in value, and then I'll be able to move on. And it worked. I bought one house, stayed in it for a couple of years. Then LA got really bad. I was living off Ventura in Sherman Oaks. I realized the riots were going by my house. I wanted to leave altogether, but I was like, we'll just move to a nicer house up the hill. We moved to Encino, the most beautiful house that I could have died in. I loved that house. Wasn't quite like this, but like it was like a mini one of these, right? Loved it, new construction, the whole thing. I thought we were going to raise our family there, live there forever. We lived there for a year, and then what I saw was that the crime and all the stuff wasn't going away, and then everything with Newsom and the recall and all that. But in both houses, I got low interest rates on both houses, and I made money on both houses, and then I rolled that over into something in Florida. And now in Florida, I have no income tax. If the system was working to empower people, what would you want people to do? You would want people to own something for themselves. When you own something for yourself, whether it's a little piece of land or a house or a car or something, you're more inclined to take care of it, and you're more inclined to grow it and nurture it and everything else. We all know that with everything. You care more about your bedroom than you do about a hotel room, right? Like, these are obvious things. It's why when you have an ever-growing government, like, the government doesn't do anything well because nobody's really in charge. Nobody's really accountable. It is that thing that you mentioned before. So for me, if the government was responsible and wanted to empower people to do the right thing, it would constantly, well, you'd be taxing people less and less. It would constantly be reining itself in. That's what a responsible government, and the way it was set up, was supposed to be that way, that the government would not go beyond what its basic duties are. I
do want to talk about that government growth, but I want to stay on the border for a second. So where I'm driving is, if I were going to steel man the sides, the one that you dismissed, I think is the most compelling, because this to me ultimately comes down to, this is a values question.
Which, the libertarian one or the
one you dismissed, where you said, people just aren't thinking. Give me your tired, huddled masses, but they're not thinking. Yeah. And I agree with you that they're not thinking intellectually. This is going back to now my just raw fear about why RFK is really in trouble, is that he's being sensible versus being emotional. Mm-hmm. But the way that I see it is, we had a national identity around this idea of give me your poor, tired, huddled masses and that yearn to be free, and they will come here and assimilate.
Yes.
And we'll do something amazing.
Yes.
And
that was
my complete hypothesis is very simple, that America is an idea. It is a story that attracts a certain kind of person. That certain kind of person, I will round to, they are entrepreneurial. Not every one of them is going to start a company, but there's this sense of like, be hardworking, be industrious. One of the most brilliant things I ever heard was, everybody talks about the industrial revolution, but they don't talk about the industrious revolution of America. And America being founded on this Puritan work ethic of, you're going to come here, you are going to grind, you are going to toil, you are going to build something with your own two hands. Nobody is coming to save you. And you are going to make something of yourselves. And look, this country for sure required a ton of bloodshed in order to become what it is. I'm not dismissing that, and whoa, will we derail if we want to go into that. And at some point I should hold myself accountable to doing an episode on that. But the reality is that we came in and we created what is currently the most powerful country in the world. And it is, from where I'm sitting, on the back of a set of ideas, which we will call values. On the back of a set of values, which will round to Puritan values of hard work, self-reliance, industriousness, get it done, don't complain, fucking work around the clock, reap what you sow, all of that. Nobody's going to give you anything, and don't tread on me. Nobody should take anything from me. Small government as much as we can. Boom. Okay. That sets forth with these incredible documents, which you and I moved off of very quickly, but a set of documents created by slaveholders, evil slaveholders. It's a whole thing we have to talk about context, because that shit was evil. But to be born into a system which literally enslaved humans, it's so crazy to me. But to be born into that system and say, okay, no one person is going to be able to get rid of this system, but we're going to create documents that will over time, actually, we saw it happen, actually get rid of this system.
They were aspirational documents. 100%. That was the idea.
But people don't understand context. You're born into context. You can't just overthrow the whole, it doesn't work like that. Anyway, we will derail. So I'm just going to say values. America is a set of values. Yeah. The thing that freaks me out, dear boys and girls, we are all controlled by ideas. It's what I call your frame of reference. Your frame of reference is a distorted set of all life beer goggles that completely warp and distort everything that you see. They are created by your beliefs, your values, and your biology. And they are going to determine not what you look at, but what you see. So we can all look at the same thing and see something very different. Now, when I was a kid, Americans, roughly, on average, were looking at this going, whoa, this is amazing. American dream. I can have whatever I wanted. That set me up to go gung-ho, build businesses, and end up changing the course of my entire family's life.
To just think that you could do it.
Correct.
That was it.
It's what I call the only belief that matters. Yeah. If you believe that you can do it, then your behaviors will follow that. If you believe that that will be fruitless, then your behaviors will follow that. Now, the set of ideas that we are, because you asked earlier, I don't know what holds us together anymore. And I don't either, because we are letting the values atrophy. We are letting the ideas atrophy. This is why politics is downstream of culture. Culture is simply the transmission of ideas. Okay, so we've now started transmitting a whole host of wacky fucking ideas. Now, I love new ideas. I love when people test and try things. I'm just saying, look at the data. Mm-hmm. And so we are, I would put forth, moving in the wrong direction on a lot of metrics that people should really care about if they're interested in human thriving, which is my North Star. We for sure could lose a lot of time defining that. But that to me is where immigration becomes a problem. If you're going to pour into this country and assimilate like mad, and you're all going to, if I'm right, adopt the Puritan mindset, no one's coming to save me, I have to do this by myself, I'm going to work very hard, I'm not going to expect anybody to give me anything, I want to contribute meaningfully to society, I want to make sure that what I build is honorable, meaning that it lifts not only me, but other people as well, that I'm going to keep the majority of what I take, but I'm nested in a government. This is not a no government place. And of course, there's going to be some degree of social safety net, blah, blah, blah. But if you had people really wanting to be here for American reasons, because we are the melting pot, but if people understand looking at the external surface of somebody's fucking skin is moronic in terms of determining whether or not they're going to be able to contribute meaningfully, the thing you have to look at is values. And then, this is rough, and I'm not sure what you do with this. I have ideas, but you have to accept that intellect is going to play a role.
Yes.
So my advice to build a country that I want to keep living in would be to be hyper selective around values and intellect. But if we are not going to do that, at a minimum, values.
Yeah.
Because when you have a country that does not share values, you will, we talk about this in Africa, you always hear this, oh, well, it's crazy that these two groups were slaughtering each other, but that's because some stupid colonialists just drew these circles around areas that don't make any sense. I am not a scholar of that, but I'm going to hazard a guess. It wasn't that. You already had people living in proximity that just didn't share values. And when they were small and tribal and not under any sort of unifying government, it was fine. They could just sort of avoid each other and go their own way. We seem to be rushing towards that right now in America.
Yeah. Well, first off, that was beautifully said. I agree with actually every single word you said right there. And that's why I said it would be a waste of time for us to like figure out what the numbers on are, all of that. But the basic premise of what you laid out there is absolutely right. And again, we just don't know now because, and the twisted part, the really twisted part.
We just don't know what.
Well, we just don't know who's coming in and why they're coming in and do they want to be part of that and everything else.
Is it that? Because we don't know. That's easy to solve.
If we had a border and there was a door,
we don't know what the people coming in believe.
Yeah, we don't know what they believe.
Those feel very different to me.
Which
we don't know who's coming in. Solvable, but I don't think actually helps anything. We don't know what the people coming in believe.
No, but those are both true things. If you become a citizen of the United States, you have to say.
You always say this one. You always say we don't know, and I'm confused as I don't know what that means.
No, well, meaning if we're to believe the numbers that we're being told right now, that it's somewhere between 7 to 10 to 12 million people that have come in 3 years. That's what everyone is saying right now.
And are you saying if I knew they were all from Paraguay, I would be fine?
No.
If I knew they were all from China, I'd be freaked out?
I would still want to have the first conversation, which is how many people should be allowed to come in? How many people do you let in per day? Do these people have family here? Are they just going to immediately come in and be on the dole, or are they coming in with the next great idea and invention and everything else? So all of the things that you said, I completely agree with. You can't just let everybody in without knowing who they are, where they are, what they're thinking, what they want to do, and everything else. But I will add even the more nefarious part, which would connect us to the Democrat Party again, which is not only it's the same party right now that is telling people that America is evil and it was founded on racism and it's a colonialist project and all of the horrible things that they say about America, that are also the same party that wants the open borders and also the same party that wants the big government programs to put these people into the system and become dependent on the system. That is a seriously toxic, completely counter to what you just said vision for America, right? You want people to come here with a dream and then come into the system and provide something for the system, provide something for themselves, thus providing for the system, and bottom up building. The way that it's being presented right now is the Democrats, in essence, whether they're fully saying this, I'm just talking about their behavior. Their behavior is the border is basically open. Come in. We're going to teach you all of the wrong things at public school. You're going to be taught, again, that America was founded on slavery, that we're a systemically racist country, that we're all of these terrible things. So now you're going to hate, we're going to teach you to hate the place that you're coming to. And we're not going to teach you about that American dream or American exceptionalism or what the founders were fighting or anything else. And we're going to also give you services. We're going to put you on the dole of other people, thus increasing the resentment of other people towards you. That is completely unsustainable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I just don't hear people often talking about assimilation, values. There's a great Thomas Sowell quote. I think you like him at least as much as I do.
Yeah.
I'll paraphrase it because it'd take me too long to look it up. But the rough quote goes like this. In fact, Drew is going to search this up while I give you the paraphrase. There is no word that has ever been repeated more times with no evidence as to its efficacy, and that word is diversity. Diversity is the thing we must overcome to have this beautiful thing called America. And
that's pretty damn close.
When I read that, I was like, holy shit, that is actually really true. Diversity of approach, super powerful. Seeing a problem from a new angle, very powerful. Not sharing values, hyper dangerous. And I'm talking just, I see everything through the lens of an entrepreneur. And I'm like, bro, I want homogeneity of values in my company because I do not want to be at war with the people in my own company. It's like, let me lay out for you what we are from a values perspective. If you think that's dope and you can absolutely commit manslaughter because you're so good at your job, you're a killer. That's going to clip out weird, but you're just an absolute murderer at your job. Then now we've got something. But if that happens to mean that we are staffed entirely by Black lesbians, I'm here for it.
I completely agree.
If it gives me a mix, great. If it doesn't, I don't care.
Well,
I want people to be good.
One of the things that I say on my show all the time is that if you just sort of peel back the thin veneer of tolerance that the left talks about, what you will find is something very nasty underneath it. When they say diversity is our strength, it doesn't mean anything, right? For the reasons that you just illustrated. If you have all of these people that have horrific ideas and terrible ideas, blah, 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 and all this stuff, but their skin colors are all different, and everything else, how is that strong? That's not strong. It's just messy. It's messy and most likely toxic and probably horrible and is going to end in an untold disaster. But if you have what you just laid out there, which is you don't care about their genitals or their skin color or anything else, but you're like, damn, I want the best engineers. And then it turns out you ended up with all Black lesbian, and I'll add midgets into it. That's a very niche thing. You got a whole bunch of Black lesbian midget engineers, kind of an Oompa Loompa situation.
Wow.
You've saved them from the animals and from their country and things were falling apart, and you've done that. That is pretty great.
Yeah, I do not understand people not being obsessed with utility. I have an outcome that I desire, and these are the things that lead me to that outcome. This is why I think people really should take the time to lay out their philosophy. I haven't read Bin Laden's manifesto, letter to America, whatever it was, but from what I hear, he actually says, this is why we hate you. This is the problem. Cool. At least now we know. Mm-hmm. But when you have people that don't take the time to lay out their own philosophy, they don't know what they believe, they're steering entirely by emotion, this is where you run into trouble. And if you don't know what outcome you're trying to achieve, you don't know whether you're marching towards it. So we have all these policies, but we don't have KPIs by which we're holding these things accountable to. It's pretty nuts. What do you think about what's going on in France? So keep France for the French seems to be the headline takeaway.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you think about it?
Well, I would say that France, just like every other country, exists as a nation state to protect the interests of the French people. That is not necessarily a skin color, by the way.
I was going to say, is it racist to do that?
No, it absolutely isn't. Again, every country exists. The way you get diverse nations is that every country gets to decide what it is. The country of Chad can behave in a certain way for the people of Chad. Maybe it's not always going to operate for the people of Chad, but it can do what it wants within those borders, and that's different than how Belgium or than how El Salvador is going to operate. What's happening in France right now is a really strange perversion of how democratic rule is supposed to be, in that the party of the right, I will not say far right, but the party of, because if you listen to Marine Le Pen, who is the leader of what is thought of as the far right party, we've played several of her speeches on my show, and if you listen to her speeches, she doesn't say anything racist. She doesn't. She talks about the love of France and she talks about she literally talks about classically liberal values of that country and everything else. What she's upset by is that because of leftist leadership of the last probably 3 decades, but mostly in the last 10 years, they have let in millions of people. Most of them happen to be Muslim, but not all of them, who have ideas that are counter to French ideals, that are not liberal in nature, that have different views as it pertains to women's rights, that have different views as it pertains to gays and other minorities and everything else. And they won. They had the most votes in the election, but then all of the far left parties decided to join together and basically override the election. So they really should have won. She should be the next president of France, but the far left is going to be in charge of France, and France is in serious trouble right now. Serious trouble, because it has been getting worse and worse. Paris is not the Paris of Forget Paris. If you saw Billy Crystal, I think that came out in 1995 too. It is not that Paris anymore. It isn't, and the Jews are going to have to get out of France. I see no situation that this is going to end well in France if the far left fully takes power there.
That is a very big statement.
Yeah. You got a couple 100,000 Jews left in France. The system has made it clear that it doesn't care for them, and if you're going to have people that can just...
In what way has the system made it clear?
There is an obvious truth here that if you get to a certain percentage in these countries of you get to a certain amount of Islamic immigration into these countries, and the people decide not to embrace French values, the same thing that you just talked about from an American perspective. I wouldn't care about anyone's religion if someone came into a country and said, "Oh, but I'm an American first. I'm a French first. I believe in the founding aspirational documents here in America, or I believe in the founding principles of France, and I believe France is a multicultural place." I mean, they've had people from all over the world that have lived in France. You don't just walk into France and only see white people. Obviously, you see black people and Asians and everything else. It's not as open as America, because America, as you said, was an idea that everyone could come here. So it's different than that. France is also older and everything else. But when you let in a certain amount of people, generally from a specific religion, it does not work out well for people in other religions or minorities. That's just a truth. It's extremely uncomfortable to talk about.
Yeah. So you're talking specifically Muslims.
There are 22 Arab states that are basically all Muslim states. There are virtually no Jews left in any of them. There are basically no Christians left in any of them. There's a couple Coptic Christians left in Egypt. There's a reason for that. The more that London has become Islamicized, or whatever word you want to call it, the worse it has gotten for other people. That's just true. It's just true. I don't know every country has to decide what they want to do with that. The Dutch just elected Geert Wilders. He's largely against this type of immigration and is promising to deport people. We'll see. I'm not for I would never be for deporting the Muslim family who operates the same way every other family does in America and is abiding by the laws and all of those other things, obviously. But if you have people that are importing all of these bad ideas and then behaving outside the realms of law, and then you see these protests that we're now seeing all over the place, where they're literally, they're celebrating terrorist organizations, avowed terrorist organizations that have stated goals of genocide. Again, it's one of those things. How long can that stand for? So I would say to people in France, if you're a minority in France right now, Why the intersectional government, the leftists align with the jihadists, with the radical gays and all that thing's not going to work for very long. It's going to descend into chaos very quickly.
How much daylight is between your views on Muslims and Sam Harris's?
I mean, to be totally honest with you, I haven't listened to Sam in quite some time, so I don't know where he's at, say, in the last 2 years as it relates to all of this. But I don't want to frame it. Wouldn't want to frame it as Muslims per se.
What would be the right way for me to understand what you're saying?
It's just one of these things. It's like annoying to talk about in some respect.
Because it's so hot?
Yeah, because it's so hot, and it can be clipped in any which way that will come off the wrong way.
Yeah. I get using sentences that are going to be hard to get out, but I do want to understand, like, even if, so for instance, I haven't thought enough about this problem to give you a specific take on that, but I believe that people should be able to think up from first principles.
Okay, so let's try it this way. So can you give me a place in the world that is Muslim majority or run by Muslims that is good for anyone else besides Muslims, or even good for women or other minorities that may be Muslim, like gays?
I have no idea, but that's knowing what you don't know, not that, oh my God, I've looked everywhere and I can't find an answer.
But basically, I think
here's how I would approach the problem. And this is, hey, dear internet, I'm very open to people helping me actually think through this problem better. But so when I don't know the history or I don't know the specifics of a situation, that to me, I don't think it is helpful for people to think of it as like, oh, I don't have to think about that. I think people should practice thinking up from first principles, knowing that I will not be able to give you any specifics about Muslim immigration, but I can tell you what would need to be true for this to work. So I'm going to skip sort of the first part of physics, as it would be a waste of time in this conversation, go right to the way human psychology works. Okay, the way human psychology works, we know that people are super tribal. So we also know that for humans to work together flexibly in large groups, religion is one of the most powerful ways that we get very large numbers of people to work together. There's a memification of the belief system that travels in story through religion. So already, if I have religions that are coming together, I know, I have a potential friction point because they do such a good job of triggering tribal stances, and that they create they allow for the very clear communication of value sets. So now when you have religion v. religion, you don't have sort of that secular like, oh, I haven't thought about that. And oh, cool, you're introducing me to a new idea, word. It's like, no, we don't eat food like that. You don't eat food like that. We don't dress like that. You don't dress like that. So you ratchet up in a big way the potential for conflict because you have very clearly defined values that are easy to disseminate amongst the population that have all these visual cues to each other as like, ooh, I'm on one team, you're on another. Okay, so now I'm like, I don't know if one religion is better or worse. I just know that religions tend to have a collision point. Now, in America, for a long time, there's been, I don't know how people feel about this, but from where I'm sitting, it feels like a watering down of some of those principles. It's become far more secular. And so that's one of the ways that we've dealt with it is, I think this will be backed up by data, but I do not have data. This is just 48 years of being an American. We don't have as strong of Orthodox communities. Those are going to be much smaller. We have them, but that's not like the super present thing.
I think that can be empirically proven, by the way. I mean, there's a lot of data
it will be, it is an empirical question. I just don't have the answer. Okay, so now you go, all right, if we have religions that are immigrating to the United States or to France, wherever, and they don't want to assimilate, now I'm getting nervous. Again, this does not yet trigger me as like, oh, this is a Muslim problem. This could be an IRA problem, whatever. It's just any problem where I have a religious element. They're easy to identify and they're colliding with another religion. And if neither of those religions are leaning into the sort of moderate secular angle, you're going to have woes. And so then it's like, okay, well, we better have some way, if politics is downstream of culture, we better have some way at the level of culture to address this. Because if we don't, you're just going to have these tribes that grow until they either secularize or they collide in spectacular fashion.
Or one beheads the other, which is basically...
Well, that would be collide in a spectacular fashion. So the bet I don't know enough to make myself is whether the orthodoxy in people that are coming in, bringing Islam with them, if the orthodoxy is such that they will not become secular, they will not integrate into the value system of the country. If they won't, again, this goes for any religion.
Of course.
There's going to be a collision. And that, if we are both right, and you said who said it first, but whoever said that politics is downstream of culture, I think everything is downstream of culture.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the biggest ways to manipulate your own frame of reference. So if we cannot get a shared frame of reference, you will have a collision. But again, Sam Harris has a take that it is particularly pronounced in the Muslim faith, that the orthodoxy becomes so extreme around the idea of a caliphate. This is where now I'm just into ignorance. I don't know enough about it. But you'll have that set up with any religion.
Right. So again, I can't speak to exactly what Sam is talking about, but the principle you just laid out there, I think, is correct. And I would also say that not all religions, just like not all ideas, are equal. So if you were just to look at the big three monotheistic religions of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, Judaism doesn't proselytize. So they're not out there looking for converts, right? It's extremely difficult to convert to Judaism. So that's very fundamentally different than a religion that is out there looking to evangelize. Now, what's different, so Islam and Christianity both evangelize. They want more people to convert to them. But that doesn't mean that they're equal either, because if a whole bunch of even if a bunch of Christian missionaries move into your community, the chance they may talk to you about Christianity, they may welcome you over for a potluck and show you their lifestyle and try to get you to come on Sunday to pray with them and everything else. You have very little chance that it's going to escalate to anything beyond that. If a bunch of, let's say, more, again, this is where the words are all sort of muddled, but if you had more radical elements of Muslim people moving into your neighborhood, there is every reason to believe that they would be encroaching on you more and more. Or how do you think they would be treating the Jews that live there, or the other minorities, or the gays, or anything else? That is just fundamentally different. America, which is a largely Christian country, right? That's why the left seemingly hates America. Also is widely accepting of virtually every type of minority. Actually, it celebrates every type of minority, which is also bizarre. Like, you don't have to celebrate that somebody likes to wear a furry costume and run around putting someone on a dog leash. They can do that if they want, but you don't have to celebrate it. So they are different, but they are not all the same, even just by their actions. And I think that's an important distinction to make.
Yeah. Yeah. This is all.
But also, I would say, all that being said, I'm by no means am I an election expert as it pertains to the French. We're just talking about like the broad trends that we're seeing across Europe right now, where Hungary doesn't have this problem because they closed their borders and people say they're racist. And again, I never got the implication that Orban was racist. England has this huge same problem that they have. As I just said, the Netherlands just voted in somebody thought of as on the far right. Italy did the same thing. So these countries are just responding to things. It's not racist to want Italian culture to be preserved. You can decide what your immigration policies are. Look, is Japan...
Are you sure about that?
Yeah.
Let me paint a picture, and this may be where you're headed.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Interesting idea.
Yeah.
I am simply trying to understand how the world really works.
Yeah.
I am a Japanophile.
Yeah.
My favorite place on planet Earth is Tokyo. I could not.
So
love
funny.
it
So
anymore.
my producer's sitting here on the way driving here. Japan is the one place that I've never been to that I really want to go.
Dave Rubin.
Yeah.
It's
and we were talking about
amazing.
taking the whole team there. Yeah.
It's
From the first time,
amazing.
1985, I saw the back end of Super Mario Brothers on Nintendo made in Japan.
Yeah.
I was like, I have to go to this place.
Rightly
yeah.
so. And
Yeah.
you will be greeted by
Yeah.
manga characters and video game characters everywhere.
Yeah.
Really,
I could see
really-
why you'd be very happy there.
Wow, my
Yeah.
God. I love virtually everything about it. It's
Yeah.
absolutely awesome.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling it's racist. And there is just a sea of Japanese people when you look out. And I know enough expats that live there that during COVID, they were like, bro, you've got obese 85-year-olds that will get a shot before a foreigner who's like, or sorry, you'll get a healthy 14-year-old that will get a shot before an obese 85-year-old that's a foreigner. They're like, they just, man, it all goes in like, how Japanese are you? And they're going to prioritize that. Now, the thing is, I love the culture that
Yeah.
it's produced. And so the fact that they have kept people out for as long as they have has created something interesting. And so, God, I absolutely do not endorse racism in any way, shape, or form.
Okay.
But I will say that keeping Japan for the Japanese is interesting.
Okay, so maybe I think the word racism has become too toxic to maybe apply exactly to what you're saying.
Can we call it school of fish?
Yeah, it's more like that in that sounds a little bit softer and is illustrating.
It's a lot softer.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Japanese want to hang with Japanese.
Yeah,
fair enough.
and I don't think that makes them racist per se. You are allowed. Again, you are allowed. It's why we are not. It's why the song "Imagine" is so idiotic, and everyone thinks it's so brilliant.
It's so brilliant.
If we just had no borders and we had no nothing, well, okay, yes, in fantasy land that doesn't have anything to do with how humans operate or anything else.
Only a fantasy.
Yes, if we had this pure fantasy land,
but then
sure.
Well, so this is interesting.
Yeah.
Did this contribute to bad things? Politics is downstream of culture. Songs are really powerful culturally. I think that song is beautiful in its aspiration. I get that it's not literally how we should.
The problem.
Yeah, give me the problem
with. I'm not a Beatles guy in general. Also, by the way, I really despise.
Not
the Beatles.
that I am, but
it's just noise. It's a lot of noise happening at once there. But the problem with that song is not. Yes. So, well, I'm not exactly sure it's aspirational. Actually, it's a fantasy, not necessarily aspirational. What would be aspirational would be that, you can live the way you want to live, and you can live amongst people that are somewhat like you, and that will create human flourishing, and someone else can do it another way. It's more of a fantasy to be like, we will have no borders, we will have no differences and everything else. That actually sounds very dystopian in a certain sense. Like we will because ultimately that leads us to all being the same. And I don't think that that's good. I don't think you think that that's good either. And that I would say is...
well, no, that might... So, well, we have to get specific about what we mean by the same. But before we do that, let me introduce an idea. So there's a gorilla troop or chimpanzee, I think chimpanzee troop, studied by the guy who wrote Determined. Somebody look him up for me. Stanford professor, absolutely brilliant guy. Anyway, there was this... there were a bunch of the chimpanzees that were eating out of like these dumpsters, and the dumpsters got tainted meat, and it killed basically all of the more aggressive males that would go and sort of dominate this garbage heap. And so after all of them died, they were left with this sort of really chill, calm, largely female-led group of chimps or baboons. And it stayed like that for generations, because what each of them learned, because they would even bring in people from other tribes, other monkey troops, they would come in and they would be like, no, we don't do that violent shit here. And they were just like, oh, cool. Like I'm going to adapt to the norms of this group. Again, politics being downstream of culture, even in monkeys. Surely somebody has found the name of this man by now. He wrote the book Determined. And that to me is really interesting, because it does put forth that if you can get the cultural soup right, that you can really change behavior tremendously. Now, I actually am a believer on the political stage of realpolitik. So please don't anybody get confused about what I think is real.
Right.
And I think the truest statement that has ever been made in pre-government, even with governments, the strong will do as they will and the weak will suffer as they must. It just is. But nonetheless, I think that again is downstream of biology and values.
So you would basically say that the monkey or chimpanzee or gorilla group that you're talking about is in some ways that's a parable for Japan, is what you're saying basically, right?
I'm saying that by being all the quote unquote same, if by same we mean values, you can create a value system that outputs something so awesome that as an American, I'm just like in awe of the culture that they produce. So I think that America is the only place I want to live. I'm not moving to Japan anytime soon. I have a bad feeling I would never be able to get business done there because I am an outsider. But nonetheless, I love and appreciate what they've created. I love being a part of the melting pot. I just want everybody to look at the reality of what you get. Mm-hmm. So to me, all of these situations are held together by values, not skin color.
Yeah.
It just so happens that from an evolutionary standpoint,
Yes.
it used to be very hard to travel. And so people would effectively interbreed. And so we all looked a certain way. Europeans look a certain way. I mean, you can tell the difference between a European and an Eastern European just by the way their face looks. I think we can all agree on that. And you go over into Asia, same thing. It all just fragments out. And for a very long time, we're all isolationists out of necessity. From that is born these incredibly unique cultures. And so I'm just saying, hey, let's all take a realist view at this stuff and say, by Japan being so insular, you get one thing. This is a very amazing product. The US has done something different, and it's created a very amazing product.
And I guess what you would say the danger part would be then is if Japan started trying to export that across the world through force. And as long as they're not doing that, then they can have their islands and it's just fine. And it's just fine. And if you don't want to be part of it, they're not forcing any of the American expats that are obese that want the COVID shot to stay there and then get going. So whether we want to call that racist, I just don't think that's largely helpful for someone trying to understand this because the word has been so mangled and everything else. But I have no problem with Japan being for Japanese people and them deciding what immigration policy is right for them. The same way that America should do it. But as you've illustrated several times, we have a different founding ethos. So our immigration policy is going to be broader and more wide and less racially connotated than theirs will be. Those are just different things.
Yeah. Play the scenarios out. I think that's the only way to put together an immigration policy that will yield the outcomes that you want. I think you have to define the outcomes that you want. Like if we want to be the nation that says, yeah, give us your poor, you're tired, you're weak, you're hungry, huddled masses, send them our way. And then realpolitik, which John Mearsheimer, if you guys don't know who he is, look him up. It is people will exploit the system. So you have to understand, okay, what are the ways in which this will be exploited? Do we want to let that happen? Do we want to stop that from happening? But it becomes a very interesting question.
I think maybe we got into this when I had you on my show a couple of weeks ago, but what generation are you in America?
X.
And where, what?
I'm Gen X.
No. I know you're Gen X. What generation in terms of your lineage of your family? Like who came here first?
I don't think we talked about this. My great grandfather had a German accent on one side and Dutch on the other, but both great grandparents.
Okay, so your great grandparents came from the Netherlands and from Germany. Now they came here. I'm going to guess the family story. They pretty much came with nothing, right?
Correct.
And they got probably to Ellis Island first?
I don't know that. One of them jumped ship. Not literally, he refused to reboard, but you get the idea.
Okay, but they came, they basically had nothing, and then America promised them, hey, you got a shot, you tired and poor and huddled masses. And then they worked real hard, just like my great-grandparents, and actually one of them was from Holland also, worked real hard, given nothing. My grandfather lived in a tenement building, 1 bedroom, 6 kids. His father, my great-grandfather, died when he was 2 years old. Then they had to move into somewhere in Brooklyn with his uncle, and then it was like 12 kids in a 2-bedroom, all of that stuff. You know, they basically had nothing. His first job, he always used to tell me, he died when I was in 2nd grade, but I remember him always telling me that his first job was it was a quarter. But that dream then, he was a lithographer. He was lower middle class, but worked real hard. They lived in Brooklyn. Then my dad grew up in that. He became solidly middle class. They moved to the suburbs, Long Island. That's where I grew up. I grew up solidly middle class, starting to get to upper middle class. And then now I'm obviously, I guess you would say it was upper class. My children will grow with that. I hope that I'm able to fill them up with all of the right ideas so that they're able to do like amazing adventures one day and everything else and not be discriminated against because they were born with a little something or because of the color of their skin or anything else. That really is the dream. That's the thing that we both want to perpetuate and we want to sell. And for some reason, America hasn't been able to sell that as well. So that's the particularly perverse part of when a certain set of people are just like open borders for everybody and also this place is horrible. Then you bring in a whole host of problems that we are now seeing everywhere, which is why there's this incredible video we played on my show a couple weeks ago. Maybe you saw it. Of there's a community center somewhere in Chicago that's largely mostly black people that go to this community center. It now, because Chicago had became a sanctuary city, is now been overrun by illegal immigrants, and now the black people of Chicago in this particular area are pissed, and they are rightfully pissed because they had a community center where they could go swimming and play basketball and maybe drop their kids off after school. And now it's been overrun by people that, again, we don't know if they will love this country or anything else. And I'm also going to guess that when your grandparents got here, that they busted their ass, your great grandparents busted their ass and worked, and they didn't give German immigrants anything, just like they didn't give Italian immigrants anything, or Irish immigrants or Jewish immigrants or anything else. It was just the freaking chance. And that roll of the dice is way better than anything we're being sold right now.
Yeah. It is interesting. My family is full of amazing people and total lunkheads. So it's,
is it 50-50? What's the percentage? That's the question.
It's generous. That's generous. Love my family to death, but like anybody's family, they
of course. But that's also the beauty of freedom. You know, you have people that grow up that are going to be the children of billionaires that will have every opportunity in the world, that will screw up everything or die of drugs or blah blah blah. And then you have the story that we all love of the guy who came with nothing and then becomes the star. And that all of that is the gestalt of America, and that is the thing that is so freaking precious that we better hold on to.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the thing that a president can actually influence, which is foreign policy. What do you want to see happen in 2024 with Ukraine, with Israel-Palestine? Like, what is the right path to walk?
I mean, look, the Ukraine thing is just unbelievably complex, again, because we hit it briefly before, but at the end, Putin has nukes. You cannot beat him militarily in that sense. So we can keep funding Ukraine to keep trying to get back territory, and you may not like that he encroached on Ukraine in the first place, and he's not a good guy. I mean, in no way a Putin defender or anything else. He didn't want NATO at his borders, which actually, because I believe in sovereign nations, I understand why he didn't want that. He didn't want, basically G.I. Joe in like a perverse sense to be at his border and be able to just take his country, or if that's what he felt was going to happen or whatever. Ukraine is also there's a huge money laundering operation there, and it's not as, we keep this idea that we're selling freedom through Ukraine or something is extremely, I would say, tenuous at best. I think the only way Ukraine gets solved is probably that they are going, that Ukraine gets solved is that they're going to have to concede some land to Russia. There are plenty of Russian native speakers that want to be part of Mother Russia. I don't see any way around that. Again, you cannot beat them militarily. So I think that just it just is what it is. And I also think the American appetite for it is, there's a, I think, more cogent argument around Israel and values and everything else that we've discussed here that I think you can sell to people. But the Ukraine thing is starting to feel, also because there's such weirdness, the Biden family in Ukraine and everything else, it's just messy, and it needs to come to some kind of negotiated end that is certainly not going to make all of the hardcore Ukraine people happy. The Israel situation is much more simple. All they need is the help. They need some diplomatic help because they're under constant diplomatic assault. They're a country the size of New Jersey that basically is like 8 miles wide, which is so unfathomable to think of. They have one international airport. I mean, it's an obscenely tiny country in a really tough part of the world, surrounded by nations that don't want them to be there, that never wanted them to be there and don't want them to be there. I think they obviously have every right to be there. And if you think, whether you're a believer or not, I mean, Jesus of Nazareth, that is the modern Israel of today, and he was Jewish. But we don't have to do the history lesson. The thing that we can do for Israel is basically say to them, you have diplomatic support. You have the military support you need, and you have diplomatic support to root this terrorist organization out, and then root this terrorist organization out, meaning talking about Hamas in Gaza. And then the much bigger problem, though, is that Lebanon is basically a failed state that's run by Hezbollah, which is a Shiite terror organization run from Iran, right? So the Lebanese government right now has nothing to do with what's happening in Lebanon. So every day, hundreds of rockets are being shot into Israel. We wouldn't tolerate one rocket being shot from Canada into Detroit. We'd bomb Mexico. So they have to, there is a much bigger war happening there because Hezbollah is much stronger than Hamas. I was in Israel about a year and a half ago. This is well before October 7th. And all anyone was talking about was the incoming war with Lebanon, not the war, not anything to do with Gaza. There was not one Jew in Gaza. No one wanted anything to do with Gaza. There was a fence, which clearly proved not to be effective. But nobody was like, oh, we want Gaza. We want it. They gave Gaza away. They wanted nothing to do with it. Egypt built a hell of a freaking wall to stop any Gazan coming in from Egypt, for any Gazan going into Egypt. So that one, I think all we can do is basically give them some military support and some diplomatic efforts as the world kind of turns against them. But the bumper sticker thing would be peace through strength. You show the world that you're strong, and then the world doesn't do crazy things. Donald Trump, I think, is completely right when he says that Ukraine would not have happened under him. Look, we have evidence of that, right? What's the region in Ukraine that they took under Obama? Sorry, I'm blanking for a second. Not Donbar,
Georgia.
not Georgia.
Crimea.
Crimea. Thank
you.
That was up at 5 a.m. this morning. They took Crimea, right? So Russia took Crimea under Barack Obama, and we did nothing. Now, I'm not saying we should have done anything, but Putin did a test under Obama, right? And the test was, Obama doesn't do anything when I make moves. Then we had Trump for 4 years. Nothing happened. Then we got Biden and we had this invasion. So there's empirical evidence to look at that when you have peace through strength. Two things that Trump did very early in the presidency that everyone thought he was completely insane. He dropped the MOAB. Remember that? The mother of all bombs. He dropped it and everyone was like, oh my God, it's going to start World War. Oh no, he did three things. Mother of all bombs. He drops this massive bomb. It's not a nuke, but it's this massive bomb. He drops the bomb. Everyone's like, my God, it's going to start World War III. Nothing happens. But what it made is our foes in the world be like, what the hell is this guy doing? He just drops big bombs for no reason. Then he moved the embassy to Jerusalem, the American embassy to Jerusalem, which is the capital of Israel. Everyone said, my God, it's going to start World War III. Nothing happened. Absolutely nothing happened. And then, of course, he created these peace deals. And everyone said, oh, my God, if you do all these peace deals without the Palestinians, all hell is going to break loose. But it wasn't true. And more were coming down the pike. And unfortunately, he didn't get a second term to make it happen. So all it is, and he killed Soleimani, the Iranian general. So if you lead with strength, I'm not for war. I'm not for nation building. Well, to say I'm not for war is just a silly phrase. Like that's what the pacifists say all the time. I'm for war when it is just, but I am certainly not for nation building. I think we should scale back all of this. If you told me we were blowing apart the foreign aid by 50% overnight, I would be for it, as long as it was equal across the board and we're not singling out countries and all of that stuff. As I said before, it's not good for our allies to be so dependent on us. But I believe in peace through strength. If you have red lines, you have to hold them. Reagan knew that. It's what ended the Cold War. These are like basic, obvious principles. The idea that you can just get out there and be like, oh, we're just whatever. And that's what we project right now. That's why it's very likely that this summer, especially with what's going on with Biden, if China's plan really is to take Taiwan, which is basically what they're saying and what everyone believes, why wouldn't you do it right now? Wouldn't this be the greatest opportunity to do it? Do it right before the election, as everyone thinks the president of the United States has dementia. Like it would be pretty great time to do it. If you were Iran and you really wanted this war to go hot, if you thought this was actually your chance to get Israel in an existential war, why wouldn't you ramp it up right now? So there's a lot. I think there's just this connects us directly to the beginning of the conversation, but there is a lot of seriously bad energy in the system that could be used by people who just want to nudge us one way or another right now, that's probably the most dangerous thing about a Biden presidency right now. It's not really whether he's in charge or not. It's whether the people or the countries or forces that would love to do damage to the world or to the United States are willing to take advantage of it. And that's the total X factor in this, because that has nothing to do with however we vote or anything else.
Do you think Trump will actually be able to end the war in Ukraine?
Yeah. It's like, what does he do? He negotiates. It's funny. Did you ever watch reality TV, or were you a reality TV guy at all?
Very little.
The only show that I ever watched reality TV, I swear, was Celebrity Apprentice. I don't know why. I turned it on one day. I haven't had cable in like 20 years, but I had cable back then. It was on NBC. I turned it on one day and Joan Rivers was on. I guess that's why I watched it. I really like Joan Rivers. She ended up winning that season. And what does Trump do? He negotiates. He sets people up against each other. He keeps everybody guessing. You think he's going to fire one person that episode. Next thing you know, he fired 3 people. And like, that is the magic of Trump. That is the mastery of Trump. That's what his book was about. Like that is the thing that allowed him to be an unbelievably successful real estate developer in New York, which it's certainly not easy to do. So I think there's every reason to believe that he would either, he would call Zelensky, or he would call Putin, or he'd call them both. And he might say to Putin, listen, this thing wraps up soon, or we're going to escalate this in a way that you just will have no idea what we're going to do. And there would be reason to believe that might be true, as I just illustrated. Or what's probably more appropriate is he'll say to Zelensky, listen, the gravy train's over, so you're going to have to concede some ground. I'm sorry, it's not exactly what we all wanted, and it may be unjust, and Putin may be evil, but we're wrapping this thing up. And then Zelensky would have to wrap it up. So I think there's every reason to believe. I think Trump also, he said that October 7th never would have happened under his watch. I think there's every reason to believe that. I don't think Iran would have had the balls to do it. Or even right now, there are 8 American hostages somewhere in Gaza. Americans. Nobody knows their names, right? Joe Biden has not uttered their name once. We could have ended all of this on October 8th. All he had to do was call Qatar, which is a tiny, tiny country that is pouring crazy amounts of money into our university system and everything else. We know where the leadership of Hamas are. They're all billionaires, by the way, and they have private jets, and they live in the Mandarin Oriental, I think, and everything else. And all we had to do is say, okay, you have 1 week to release the hostages, or we're blowing up Qatar. I don't like the idea of blowing up Qatar or killing anyone that's innocent. But again, it's peace through strength. You show people there are credible threats. You're going to release the Americans. You wouldn't even have to have said release the Israelis, release the Americans. But we haven't even done that. So this weak, neither here nor there thing that we're doing, it's bad for Americans. Like, does that make any... Look, you have obviously great resources, all well-deserved and everything else. Like, when you travel, you could have a target on your back for whatever reason, right? It's like, and anyone, forget resources or anything else. If you're an American and you go to another country right now, and you go to Mexico and there's gangs and they kidnap you, why would you have belief that America is going to do anything about you? I don't know. That is a problem. And that's what we're projecting right now.
Okay, so as you think about Trump coming into office, if we're going to play our hand well in Israel-Palestine, I see the path that you laid out in the Ukraine, but what is the similar path in Israel-Palestine?
Well, first off, just on the semantic side, it's not exactly Israel-Palestine. It's Israel-Gaza, because Palestine was never a country. There was no prime minister. There was the British Mandate of Palestine, which is historic Judea and Samaria and Israel itself and everything. But again, we don't have to do a history lesson on that. But I think it's worth...
You brought it up, so...
It's worth discussing a little bit, just because people get very confused by that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I am familiar enough with this argument that it's fascinating.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's going to change anyone's mind. So are you I'll lay out my best understanding of this, and you tell me if I go astray. My understanding goes like this. Somewhere in around 67, people first start using the phrase, the people of Palestine. Because that begs the question, well, if there was a people of Palestine, then there must have been a nation state of Palestine, and also triggers a UN resolution that any peoples have the ability to self-determination and therefore can defend themselves, et cetera. And so they want to get world opinion around the fact that these guys have a right to defend themselves. Is that accurate?
Mostly accurate. Well, no. I mean, in essence, what you're saying is there were never a people known as Palestinians, meaning that there was the British Mandate of Palestine, and Jews lived there, and some Christians lived there, and Druze lived there, and Bedouins lived there, and everything else. And you can look at, and people could look at it right now, find New York Times headlines from pre-modern state of Israel. It wasn't Jews versus Palestinians. It was Jews. It was Jews and Arabs. I'm trying to figure out
why you bring that up. Why would you want to be careful to outline that, well, it's not really against Palestine, it's
because it implies that Palestine was a nation state unto itself.
Right.
They're fighting a terrorist group that exists in Gaza right now. Gaza, a place that not one Jew or Israeli has lived since 2005. They left unilaterally. They left them infrastructure.
But let's say that everybody goes, oh shit, I didn't know that. Do you think they'll be like, oh, word, just keep bombing? Now that I know that they're not people?
No. But I don't know. Well, I would say for someone like you that clearly cares about details and getting sort of like a chronology right and everything else, I think it's worth noting. That's all I would say. We don't have to get too lost.
It's really
in that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But this is one that I'm like, okay, if people are going to make a compelling argument, I don't think that's the one.
Well,
that they were
compelling
never
argument
people,
for what?
That I have a feeling the compelling argument that I've heard you make it before, so I know it's basically Israel has a right to defend itself, that we, as the people not at war, should not be spending our time telling them how to conduct this war, And by the way, they weren't even a people anyway. This is a collection of Arabs that happen to share this land. The Israelis have just as much of a right to from a historical context.
That they've also offered them a state
So
at least
my-
6 times.
my
They've
beef
said
on
no
the-
every time. Yeah.
Right. My
Yeah.
beef on the way that people approach Israel-Palestine
Yeah.
is that it's what my wife and I refer to as don't argue about the T. So the argument is happening at the level of like the surface detail, like the word Palestine wasn't first used, or Palestinian wasn't used until 1967. It was a British protectorate before that, Ottoman Empire before that. Or on the other side, like this is our ancestral homeland. We have a right to be here, and Israelis should, leave. It's like that's not the argument.
Sure. So we
to
can
me-
punt all that if you want. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I think that to actually have, so there's two paths before us: discuss policy on how to handle the war,
Sure.
or discuss base assumptions as to whether Israel should exist or not, because that seems to be the crux of the matter. That everything else is window dressing, and this is just a question of, hey, dear person hearing my voice right now, do you believe that that Israel has the right to an ethnocentric state, that it is for Jewish people? Because that, at least with I'm very much not well educated here, but it is my understanding that there are Arabs in there. But if you were
2 million. There are 2 million who have been on the Supreme Court and who are doctors and
but
lawyers.
is
and all
it
of those
true? And maybe you can just clear my ignorance.
Sure.
Is it true that if they just did a 1-for-1 vote, that Jewish people would be outvoted by non-Jews?
No, well, first off, okay, so this is going to be very complex. So if we were counting all of the land, the historical biblical land of Israel, meaning the West Bank and Gaza itself, the numbers start changing. But Palestinians, the only time the Palestinian people have ever been able to vote or have any autonomy over themselves is when Israel gave it to them in the Oslo Accords in the 90s. Before that, they were always ruled by other people. That's one part. The other part is that before October 7th, literally there was nobody in Israel, nobody in anywhere in anything close to mainstream Israel that was cared about or in politics that wanted anything to do with Gaza. Before 1967, it was part of Egypt.
That's going to be disputed in the comments.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, there was nobody. I mean, like, there was nobody. Bibi, nobody wanted anything to do with it. They left. They wanted nothing to do with it.
Okay.
There were, what's the sick and there are many sick and twisted things that happened on October 7th. One of the most sick and twisted is that the Israelis that lived in the Gaza area over there, they were all leftists because they wanted to live in some sort of coexistence with these people. And then what happened, and I went to some of the kibbutzes down there to see the devastation, and to say it's unimaginable isn't even close to what it really is. But one of the ways that they were able to kill so many people is that they had people that came from Gaza, they had work permits, and they would come. And in many cases, they worked with these people. A lot of them were agriculture farmers. They worked with them for years and years, sometimes decades, and they knew how many people lived in each house, how many men, women, children, and they marked it on the doors so that the Hamas terrorists would then come in and then could kill everybody and know how many people they had to kill or where they might be or where the safe room was or a whole bunch of other stuff. But without getting into all of that, if you want like what the political solution is or what's like the day after all of this, Hamas as an organization needs to be destroyed. It is a terrorist organization that needs to be blown apart. That largely has been taken care of. There are very few rockets left. If you want like what does the day after look like in terms of structure, what does a government look like with the roughly 2 million people who live in Gaza? It should be Egypt that basically takes Gaza. Sinai is right between Egypt proper and Israel. And Israel had Sinai, which it won in a war. It's like 8 times bigger than Israel proper. They gave it up for a piece of paper, for a peace deal that largely has existed for about 50 years, since right around when we were born. The thing is that Egypt, unfortunately, they don't want any of the Palestinians there. And by the way, no Arab country wants any of the Palestinians. If anyone cared about the Palestinians, right? Like, if anyone believed that there was a genocide occurring, which there isn't, but if anyone believed that, why hasn't there are 22 Arab nations, as we talked about before. They have tons and tons of money. They have tons and tons of resources. They have 500 square miles of land, something more than that. 500 million square miles of land, I think it is. You could put them all in Sinai. No Israelis ever going to go there. No Jews ever going to go there. No Christians ever going to go there. You could give them a country there. You want to give them a country. They have a country. It's called Jordan. Jordan is Palestinian majority, actually, and it's ruled by the Hashemite king, King Abdullah of Jordan. He is ruling an apartheid nation. Literally the only nation in the Middle East that doesn't have apartheid is Israel. The Arabs have equal rights, and again, sit on the Supreme Court and have all the jobs. In Lebanon, if you are Palestinian, you are not allowed to own a certain amount of land. You are not allowed to be a doctor or a lawyer or a series of other things. Again, people can Google all of this. So every other nation in the Maldives, you're only allowed to be Muslim to live there. That's not the way it is in Israel. So there's one nation that exists in the Middle East that is anything remotely close to liberal values or progressive ideology or anything else, where women are treated well and gays are treated well and all of the rest of it. And ironically, that's the place that the progressives hate the most. So I guess Egypt has to take some responsibility for that. The problem is that Egypt has been building all these tunnels. That's why everybody doesn't want Israel to go in now to Rafah, which is the last border part, basically, to Gaza and Egypt, because clearly Egypt has been defaulting on its peace agreement and helping a lot of this stuff be built. So that's a huge problem right there. And then I don't know exactly what you do with all of the West Bank. These may be largely intractable problems. But I can tell you this: when I was there just a few months ago, I got in a cab from Jerusalem to a suburb of Tel Aviv, and I was in with an Arab Israeli. So he's an Arab Muslim, full citizen of Israel, and we talked about it. And he does not want to live anywhere else. He knows that he is a minority in that country, but he doesn't want to live anywhere else because he has more rights and more of an opportunity than literally in any other Arab nation. So it's weird to say the least.
Okay, so several questions.
Yeah, I said a lot of things there.
No, it's great, and thank you for helping to educate me on this. So Israel has a problem in that they border people that some percentage of them obviously wish them harm. Why don't any of the surrounding areas want to assimilate Gaza?
So meaning, why doesn't Egypt just want to take Gaza
Is Egypt
back?
the only other country that borders Gaza?
Egypt is the only country that borders Gaza.
Okay, so why won't...
And by the way, Egypt had Gaza pre-1967. And then they launched a war and lost, and Israel got Gaza. And then Israel had Gaza from 67 until 2005. And then there were about 8,000 Jews that lived there. That's it. That's what the settlements were. And they basically, in 2005, they were like, forget this. It's not going to work. We want nothing to do with these people. There is no such, they're not going to have peace or coexist. Let's just separate. And unfortunately, what they did is they built a wall that was basically a fence. I mean, I saw it, and you can watch the October 7th videos. They built a fence that had some barbed wire. The Egyptians, have you ever seen what the Egypt-Gaza border looks like? You should Google it sometime. They have massive concrete walls with huge amounts of barbed wire and ditches, and they blew up tunnels and everything else. If the Israelis ever treated the Palestinians nearly as poorly as the Egyptians had, the world would be in a complete uproar. But in terms of geography, the only country that it borders, and again, Sinai is largely empty. Sinai is, if you can, that's the Egyptian border wall that you're looking at right there. And then if you compare that right there, and that's just a portion of it, but you can see cement blocks, you can see multi-layers of barbed wire, there's electronic surveillance, et cetera, and they were blowing up underground tunnels. And if you look from the October 7th videos of the wall that is the wall, it was a fence that they had with Gaza. It was a far worse fence than you have at your house right here, which your gate is pretty damn impressive, by the way. Really cool. Whatever you paid for that, it was well worth it.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, so does Egypt have an official statement about...
No, they don't. No, they don't want them. They don't. I think I tweeted out the day after October 7th. I'm pretty sure you can find it. Maybe it was 2 days after. Like, this all end. If they want to solve all of this right now, well, I gave you one military solution, which is we should threaten Qatar, because Qatar will just cut off the money and then that'll be that. But the other solution is if anyone really cares about the Palestinians, and my estimation now is they don't. This has nothing to do with the Palestinians. This has to do with taking out Israel. It has nothing to do with the Palestinians. If you cared about those 2 million Gazans, you could get them all to Sinai in 3 days. The Jews would never have anything to do with them. You could get all of the Qatari money to build them a flourishing and thriving economy in Sinai, you could do it. You could use all of the technology that Israel did by turning a desert into green. You could do all of that in Sinai, because Sinai is just basically a desert. But Egypt doesn't want it, because they know they're going to import a huge amount of terrorists, a huge amount of people who would love to overthrow the Egyptian regime and everything else. And that's why nobody does. That's why the Jordanians, look up Black September from, I think, 1972. They killed about 30,000 Palestinians in a day because Palestinians were upset with the Jordanian government, and about 30,000 in, I think it was a week, actually. So it's like nobody really cares about them. This is all just like a cudgel to take out this one tiny state that, again, is the size of New Jersey.
Okay, so let me see if I understand your position. If you recognize your position, let me know that I understand your position perfectly. Otherwise, please correct. There was a period, first of all, the Palestinian people have never had a state. They didn't start calling them Palestinians until something like 1967. By calling them Palestinians, they are trying to trigger in public opinion the sense that they used to have a state and they're now being denied that state. The Egyptians, who also share a border with the Palestinians, do not want them because they believe that they would be importing terrorists, people that would cause problems. So they have erected an even more aggressive wall than the Israelis. The Israelis won Gaza in a war. They stayed there for quite some time with about 6,000, 8,000.
About 8,000 people.
8,000 people. They then, in 2005, realized this is not worth the headache. So they retracted back out of Gaza. I've heard that they even dug up the graves of Israelis and so removed
They
those
left
as well.
greenhouses. They left infrastructure. There were wealthy Jews in America that donated millions of dollars to Gaza to help reconstruction, and they basically burned the greenhouses and destroyed all the infrastructure.
Okay. So Israel backs out. Palestinians destroy the infrastructure that they leave behind. And the reason that this part, I might be putting words in your mouth, so this is really where you're going to want to correct me. The reason that Qatar isn't going to build them a new settlement, though I can understand why Palestinians would be opposed to that because they don't want to move, as crazy as that may seem. And the reason Egypt isn't going to do it is for the same reason, which is they want to use the Palestinians as a ploy to get rid of Israel.
Yes, it really is as simple as that. It's not much more complex than that. Most of the Arab governments are not particularly good to their people. So every now and again, if something starts up with Israel, it's like, forget about all of your problems. Look what's going on. Look what those Jews are doing over there to those Arabs over there. And so they've become, I mean, it's in some ways it's the story of the Jews. They've just become the scapegoat in a game that is deeply dangerous and very difficult to live in. I don't know that any other nation, imagine, they've done the per capita version of this, but, they lost about 2,000 people on October 7th and still have, however many hostage. So if you were to extrapolate that they're a nation of about 8 million people, we're a nation of 320 million people. I don't remember how many that turns into in Americans. But imagine if, let's say, 100,000 Americans were killed in one day and another 20,000 Americans were held hostage somewhere. And we had rockets being fired in from another part of the country and still from that part for months. Now that has stopped because of the military operation. Imagine what we would be like as a nation right now, not only security-wise, but the psychology of the nation and everything else. Israel has largely managed, again, I was there, like they're still out and about in Tel Aviv. They're still functioning as a nation. That is rather extraordinary, actually, that they are able to deal with existential threats constantly, like the most existential threats you can think of, and still function in any kind of way is, I don't know what, I literally cannot imagine what we would be like if we were under that kind of pressure.
Yeah, I mean, that begs a bigger question of what our response would be. And I have a feeling given what we did in Iraq, where it was just completely unjustifiable, as far as I can tell. We'd go in pretty hot and heavy.
But I would say this, that any country that is attacked by a terrorist group and that has their people kidnapped and slaughtered and everything has every right to do whatever they want. I believe that. I believe that both ways.
Do you want a second to reword that? That is going to
okay. So yes, yes, I could shave that off by like 20%. Not whatever they want, but you have a right to defend your citizens. Period. Well, okay. So let me slightly switch it. No other country on earth could have gone through what Israel gone through and then would be told you also have to feed the people now who have your captives. You have to make sure they have running water and electricity and internet and everything else. You have to take care of them. You're also not allowed to bomb certain buildings without warning them. No one in the history of warfare has done any of these things. It would only be the Jews that would be said, okay, you can willfully a whole bunch of you can be killed and you have to care more about the people who are doing the killing than getting your own citizens back. That would be a cleaner way of saying it.
Yeah, so this is one of those...
It would never happen. It would never happen to Canada, and it would never happen to Uganda, and it would never happen to Japan or anything else.
Going back to the Florida sheriff or whatever saying, thank you for killing the guy, this is where words matter in the court of public opinion, man. You got to be careful.
Yeah.
So people that would be critical of so I did a breakdown of your beliefs. You said, yes, that I understand your beliefs. So the people that would be critical of those beliefs, what are they critical of? What is the thing? If you were going to take give me the good faith people, not somebody you think is being an asshole, but like the good faith people who legitimately understand the situation, but just see it very differently. What is their beef?
If you legitimately understand the history of the land and you legitimately understand, the thousands of years of human history and the evolution of religion and everything else and how societies were built and how Western civilization appeared here, and it wasn't by magic, it was through a lot of the ideas that were born in that part of the world and everything else. I genuinely don't know that there's a lot of good faith arguments against anything that I said. The Palestinians were off when the Ottoman Empire obviously became the British Empire. In that part of land, there was the British Mandate of Palestine. When the British were done in 1947, they said to the Arabs, again, there were no Palestinians. They said to the Arabs and the Jews, let's split this thing up. The Jews were getting a tiny portion. And they said yes. The Arabs said no and launched a war, lost a war, then lost territory. 7 Arab nations tried to destroy them. This has repeated throughout history many times. And then in the 2000s, several times they were offered a state. They have said no every time. They don't want a state. Arafat, it's in Bill Clinton's book, basically said to Bill Clinton when they were offered 97% of what they wanted with land swaps for the remaining 3%, and they were going to divvy up Jerusalem, which is completely psychotic. You can go to Jerusalem right now and get on a bus with a woman in a burqa and an ultra-Orthodox Jewish man, and they are living there in peace. There is nothing remotely close to that in any other part of the Middle East. They don't want a state. I can't steel man their ideas actually, because I don't think that they're, I think that they simply don't want Israel to exist. I think it's not much more complex than that.
It's interesting.
I think it's an ancient hatred. It's like the first hatred that ever existed. And then I think it's also it's put on steroids by all of the bad ideas of leftism of now, of that minorities are supposed to be oppressed. How is it possible that the Jews who have been oppressed and who have been holocausted and pogromed and went through the Inquisition and all of these things, how is it that they still have survived and thrived and everything else? It doesn't fit the intersectional calculator. And that actually breaks a lot of people's brains. And that's why you have these queers for Palestine, when it's like, well, Palestine would be very different for queers. But they think it makes sense. So I don't know that there's a way to steel man something that I think is fundamental. First off, I don't think you can steel man it, because I think there's almost nobody on the other side of this argument that would even concede that what we just said there, it was even true in the first place. So that I would say is a huge problem. I would say largely Israel just has to stop making these arguments, period. They're trying to live in a very difficult part of the world by the Western rules, and that's extremely difficult.
Okay, so play that out. Be more aggressive, more violent, fuck people that say you should be chill. Just go in, be as precise as you can. You're not saying be willy-nilly, but go in, kill who you need to kill, accept a certain amount of collateral damage. It is what it is.
Yeah. I don't think I think every other nation understands that, actually, and every other nation would do exactly that. And every other nation would do much worse. They've done things.
Be careful with statements like that. You give people a reason to ignore the shit out of you. You do not make as somebody who wants to see the best ideas win. Yeah. You shoot yourself in the foot when you say every country would do worse. Like that's the kind of shit Trump says.
I don't think
winds people up.
I don't think that there's any reason to believe that any other country on earth would be asked to do the things that they are asked to do, nor could do the things that they are asked to do, nor would do the things they would ask to do.
Fair.
All right, fair. So I can clean that up for you.
So not for me. Like I am a outcome
for you,
obsessed. Yes.
The wider
for
you.
those of us that are outcome obsessed. So okay. One more thing that as somebody who you're a very smart person, and I love smart voices out in the world.
Uh-oh.
Yes. So what I will say is learn the steel man, because there is a great quote, which you may know better than I, but it goes something like, he who does not know his opponent's views knows little of his own. Like if you're really going to go for bat for the Israeli response, understanding, okay, here's what the people that think that this is really dumb, this is what they think. And let me tell you why we can never do that. Because man, I'm on the fringes of this, and I still feel like I've heard enough where I could give you a steel man of at least a basic like this goes back 1,000 years. I can't do that. I don't know the history well enough, but I can give you the basic steel man against your argument is what happened on October the 7th should be condemned without hesitation. It was absolutely abhorrent. However, you cannot kill as many people as you're killing, no matter what they did to Israel. The level of death and destruction, even if you knock, I'm going to kill you, and then kill them an hour later, they still die. And even if they're being used as human shields.
You should be upset with Hamas by that, yeah.
But I'm giving you the steel man, right? So you want to be able to make their best argument, to be their best litigator, and then dismantle the argument. So even if Hamas is using our people as shields, they are not our people, because they wouldn't say that, using the Palestinian people as human shields. The average person in Palestine is just trying to live. And to blow the shit out of them is going to be deeply problematic. And I can understand how.
So what would be a better way to fight a war?
Gotta let me finish the steel man.
Yeah.
Because it's like I believe this is where I hold myself accountable. I want to be able to litigate the other side so well that person will say to me, yes, you understand my position perfectly.
Yeah.
When I do that, I'm like, okay, did steel manning that make me go, I need to rethink this part of my own view? Is there something here that I should give on or whatever? And because I'm outcome focused, I'm like, I'm doing this because I have an outcome that I'm trying to get to. Like, so I'll sort of roughly period. That's the rough steel man. Terrible job. And anybody that can do a better one, I hear you. This is not my area of expertise. But I look at everything, again, just doing this, call it thinking up from first principles. So I race from physics up to human psychology, and then I start speaking out loud.
Sure.
So human psychology is such that if the Palestinian people do not want their children's lives to be better than their own, we are going to have a problem. And so we have to now at least zoom in on that. Is it that they don't believe their children will have a future because Israel has created these horrific conditions, which people that seem like very cogent thinkers are saying? And I think it's John Mearsheimer, who's just like, what Israel is doing is absolutely out of order. This is insane. They have created an open air prison. It is apartheid. I don't understand that argument well enough. That's why I'm not even sure, like, if Israel
there is apartheid in Gaza, and that no Jews are allowed to live there.
Okay, this is where I unfortunately can't be helpful. I don't know enough about it.
Yeah.
But anyway, people that I consider very cogent are like, they give me reason to say, oh, we need both sides to be steel man so we can actually figure out what's really going on. But anyway, what I know to just be at the highest level possible true is if the Palestinians don't want their children's lives to be better than their own, you get into weird territory. Now the question becomes, do they not believe their children's lives will be better for religious reasons? That, we know that they will go to heaven immediately and they bypass judgment day. Again, this is not my area of expertise. I don't know the Quran, but something along those lines at a headline reading level. Is that the problem? And so because they know their kids will go straight to heaven, and if they die here, things get better for them, and that can be leveraged to get rid of Israel. Is that the issue? Or is the issue that it's just such horrible conditions? Now, when I look around, again, not an expert, but when I look around the rest of the Middle East, which I've been to, not a lot, but I've been to, and it's like, hey, you would expect anywhere, you meet lovely people who want their kids' lives to be better, and they're focused on how do we improve education. And is it to a Western eye weird to see women in a burqa walking next to women in jeans? Yes, it's unexpected, and I don't know how to read that from a Western perspective. But I can see that people with the same religion are having outcomes where they're thinking about their kids and they want their kids' lives to be better, and they're planning generations down the line. So I'm like, well, we have a solution where it is very, very, very possible that the religion is tied up in exacerbating and creating a problem. But there are ways, and I mean, even just going back to Trump and saying, Abraham Accords, cool. Like, let's get back to that. Let's figure that out. But I am not the person to put anything on the table other than knowing what I know about human nature. We have to find a way for Palestinians to care about the future of their kids. Again, I'm not close enough to tell you why they are caught up in the position that I don't know why they're in the position that they're in, because I don't know that they're caught up. This could be of their own making. But if someone of your degree of sophistication and knowledge can go, here's this bundle as I see it, in a way where they go, yes, you understand my position perfectly, then it feels like it can be addressed.
Sure. So I actually totally appreciate that, and it's not lost on me what you're saying. It's interesting because when you're on this side of the interview, what I'm always trying to do is and it's why I've said the phrase bumper sticker a couple of times. I'm usually trying to do here's kind of the big thing, and then let's move into a million different things. So I can absolutely make the steelman argument that you made there. So we don't need to repeat that. I would say that the problem in this case, the problem with that is that there is literally, I would say, and I don't think this is an exaggeration, there is nothing the Israelis can do that will satisfy the mob that now exists. It doesn't matter if they knocked on a door, and every time they knocked on a door, an Israeli soldier was shot, as opposed to just sending a drone in or doing anything else. There is no amount of Israelis that would be too many dead that the other side would be like, all right, this was a bit much. I saw the 47-minute video, the private 47-minute video. Like when you see a video of someone being beheaded and then someone picking up their head and laughing and walking away, or calling their mother, Mom, I just killed 7 Jews, and the mother screaming and undulating and all of that stuff. And they didn't say I killed Israelis. They said I killed Jews. They would have just as gladly killed Bernie Sanders as they would kill, Benjamin Netanyahu. So I think that partly because it is tied into religion in a way is the really difficult thing for people to understand. At some point, you have to defend your people and your way of life. You can do everything you can to do that as morally and responsibly as possible and everything else. And I believe they've done that in ways that I don't think it's an exaggeration, no other army in the world would be asked to do or could do. I think that that's empirically true. If a whole bunch of terrorists burst into France and did this, and France could do whatever they wanted to Belgium, and people would just be like, that's it, Belgium lost control of their border, blah, blah, blah. So the weird part of steel manning their argument in this case is there's no end to it. There's no end to, okay, so they could do this different. Okay, yes, you're right. This little operation in a town, in a place that no one's ever heard of before, and that all of these people out on the streets are screaming about, no one had heard of Rafah 3 months ago. All of these things. It's why the narrative, it's so incredible the way the narrative flips in front of our eyes. That the most unimaginable terrorist attack happens. There's still babies. There's at least one baby, probably not alive at this point. We don't know. They might have raped women that could be having babies at this point. We're past 9 months of this thing now. There's unimaginable horrors happening. And they're the ones that are told, now your existence is up for debate. So let's debate whether your existence should exist, whether your country should exist at all, how you fight a war, when you fight a war. We're also going to send mobs to synagogues in Los Angeles and in Dublin so they're under attack on every possible way. And so I think there's a weird waste of time to some extent with steel manning, because it's like, okay, offer them this, offer them this, offer them. It's like offering a peace deal. We offered you 97%, you don't want it. Oh, we offered you 99%. Oh, the 3% that was the problem, we offered a land swap on that. That was no good either. And at some point, you just go, It's enough. And I think that's what they tried to do with Gaza in the first place. Again, you can look at videos, the idea that they were somehow in this open air prison. First off, if you think it was an open air prison, why didn't Egypt open the door? And no one ever asked Egypt to open the door. I literally tweeted that out on October 8th. Egypt could have just opened the door. That would have been it. You could have brought all the people over, figured it out. They didn't do that, and no one asked them to do it, right? But you can go there. It's funny because a lot of these videos got deleted. If you looked at videos that pro-Palestinian accounts were tweeting out for the weeks after October 7th, it was all like, look at our beautiful Gaza they're destroying. And you see luxury hotels, you see restaurants on the water, you see, I mean, they have the same beach as Tel Aviv, which is one of the most beautiful beaches in the world. They had all of the opportunity for all of that, and they were doing it largely. They had 5-star hotels there. It wasn't an open-air prison. Like Auschwitz was an open-air prison. It's a little bit different. Gazans are not starved. It is not the most overpopulated place on earth. All of these things, these are just lies. So at some point, you can just stop playing along with that. So I'm not saying it's not worth steel-manning. Of course it always is. And of course it is in the rare moments that in this case, you can find someone on the other side that honestly wants to discuss what really is going on there. Unfortunately, either because of algorithms or TikTok or something else, or I think a lot of the unfortunate ways that the left took over the institutions in the United States so that there are so many young people in this country who are so confused. And again, it's why you have trans drag queens who would be the first people to be beheaded in Gaza, you know, telling children that they should be queers for Palestine. I think that at some point you're just like, okay, enough of that. We're just going to do what we have to do.
It's interesting. So I have a different take on this, and this is exactly how I felt during the Terrence Howard, Joe Rogan thing, which is talking to scientists off camera. They're frustrated. Why do I have to deal with this? This is so absurd. And
meaning that he went on there and said like a bunch of stuff about patents, and it sounds like it really wasn't
to debunk.
Yeah.
And I spoke to Eric Weinstein and I said, Eric, look, this has reached a level of cultural awareness where even if you think every word out of his mouth is ludicrous, you still, if you want to help the public at large get a better idea set to get behind, then you're going to have to go refute these one by one. Now, Eric is, I could not be more impressed with him. He went on with such kindness. Was he a little frustrated talking to a mortal? Yes. So people point out that he sighed a couple times, but we'll forgive him. But he went through point by point and said, look, here are the things that are good. Here are the things that I think are problematic. And there was way more problem than there was good stuff. But he went through it. And that allowed for a national conversation to happen around the base assumptions. Like, dear Terrence Howard, you have these, 4 base assumptions. And let me show you how 3 of them are bad and 1 of them is good. The 3 that are bad just absolutely destroy 98% of everything you're saying. And let's focus on the 2%, but let's not be delusional about where we go wrong. And this is, I think, the only way forward on Israel-Palestine. It is entirely possible that this just is unsolvable, that it is, there's so much human hate. Bear with me 1 second, I'll wrap this up. But there's so much human hate, it just, we may not be able to get to the other side. Fair enough. But at least if we start with, okay, person that I'm having this debate with, this is what I got from Norm Finkelstein on Lex with Destiny, and I forget the other 2 people. But Norm said at the beginning, Israel shouldn't exist. And so I was like, then that's the only thing to talk about, because every word out of your mouth on the other side, he's just going to be like, but that yields an outcome where Israel still exists. So this doesn't make sense. It's nonsensical. And so once you lay out somebody's base assumptions, your entire worldview is predicated on Israel shouldn't exist. Great. Then that's the only thing that we have to talk about. Talking about borders and 2 states, none of that matters, because we know the only outcome that they will accept is that. By forcing people to say, you understand my position perfectly, what you're doing is getting them to confess, oftentimes, the thing that they don't want to say. Like, I want to ask Egypt, why the wall? Why won't you let them in? Is your base assumption that they're terrorists? Is your base assumption that they don't want in and you're protecting them from Egyptians? Like, tell me why. Yeah. And once you get them to say,
you should try to find some people to have that conversation.
Good luck, right? Like you're not, but at least now we pull these things into light and we can say Egypt won't comment. So people will draw their own conclusions. These are the things that they say, what they're fighting for, what they have a beef against. I can state their position in a way that they will say back to me, yes, that's my position. And cool. Now we argue those things. And if somebody is acting out of accordance with those things, then we know, this is not sincere.
Let me try to, I don't know that I've talked about this so personally before, but I grew up around Holocaust survivors on both sides of my family. My uncle's father, my Uncle Jerry, who married my dad's sister, had the tattoo survivor. I heard all of the stories of people being killed and where his wife had to hide in a farm and like all of these unbelievable things. And I grew up, and it wasn't just my family, like my parents' friends' families all had this, survivors. Some didn't have any grandparents left, all of these other things. I think at some point, if that's what the story is, you've heard that before from your ancestors, how quickly things turn, all of this stuff, then at some point the time for steel manning in a time of absolute crisis, when 2,000 of your people are dead and there's all these hostages, isn't that effective. Again, I'm not saying it's not worth it. It's interesting you brought up Eric, though, because I was thinking before when you mentioned steel manning, which he was the one that sort of popularized that.
I think it was Brett.
Was it Brett first, maybe?
I think so.
It literally might have even been on my show. So, but the point is the idea that you could, concretely lay out your opponent's ideology or their arguments. Eric was obviously a big proponent of that always. And so when the IDW was blowing up and at the peak of that whole thing with Jordan Peterson and everybody, and Eric was constantly trying to steelman the arguments of the left, I always enjoyed it. I enjoyed the intellectual exercise. You're extremely good at it. So it's not, when somebody's like really cogent and thoughtful with it, it's extremely nice to hear, because it's like a straight line that has some nice little roundabout ways in it, right? But I always used to say to Eric, if we'd go out to dinner after or something else, I'd be like, do you think this is going to stop any of this? And I think and he would always I don't want to speak for him, but he would kind of be like, I don't know, but I think it's worth doing, something like that, which I think you would probably agree with.
I have a slightly different answer to that.
Okay,
if you're going
let's. I definitely want to hear your answer on that. But my point was, do you think that making arguments trying to really concretely lay out what these people's arguments are, do you think it will stop what is coming? And I would say it has not stopped any of it, that things are significantly worse in this country, that the ideologies are significantly worse. Just look at the Ivy Leagues and look at the rallies. And now there are literally Hezbollah flags being raised in New York City and tearing down of our monuments and all of those things. And none of it stopped any of it. So I'm not saying it's not worth it, but I don't know that it is worth it. I just would put it that way. But actually, I want to hear what you said.
Well, so this is where base assumptions come in. So you can understand me if you understand the following belief, that I think a person's frame of reference controls everything about their life. It will control what makes your heart race. So if you think getting promoted is dumb, then you won't even try.
Yep.
If you think getting promoted is amazing, when you get a promotion, it will literally change you physiologically for a moment. Like, you'll be excited, your heart will be faster. But that came down to frame of reference. Your people's frames of reference entirely control their thoughts on America. Their frame of reference entirely controls their thoughts on Israel-Palestine. All of these things are far less about what's happening and far more about what people think about what's happening. What people think about what's happening is controlled entirely by a set of ideas and values, just to differentiate between the two. And my belief is that if the cultural instruments that we all play, so I play two cultural instruments. One is this podcast, and the other is I make video games. And in both of those, I try to address ideas that I hope will change somebody's frame of reference, which will change not what they look at, but what they see. And if my whole thing is about personal empowerment. So if I can help your life get better by having you look at a terrible thing and seeing the path to something useful in that, then I'll feel like, cool, I did not waste my time on planet Earth. So the reason that I focus on steel manning an argument is not for even necessarily the people, like take Israel-Palestine. Either side, dear boys and girls, you're in the game of influencing people's frame of reference. And if you can accurately, so if I'm Palestine, I want to influence the world to believe that Israel shouldn't exist. And so I need to be able to steelman the argument of people who believe Israel should exist so that I can make sure that I can defeat that. If I am Israel, I want to make sure that people understand that I have a right to defend myself, and I'm perfectly happy to be neighbors with these people. But I'm going to respond disproportionately to ensure people don't fuck with me. And I want to make sure people understand where I'm coming from and all the things that happen. This is a war of ideas. Mm-hmm. Once people understand this is a war of ideas, I don't see a better rhetorical pursuit other than in the world where you and I are going to get clipped to shit, and people are going to do what they're going to do.
Yeah.
But if on balance, people see me over and over and over, walk through a steel man to where the other person's like, yes, you understand my position. It's like, cool. I'm not saying what I'm saying now because I don't understand. So I just lop off a huge amount of people that would say, well, he doesn't get it. Nope, that's not true. Now I have the thing of, I'm going to tell you what my end goal is. And then I'm going to be judged by efficacy as I move towards that end goal. Part of why I want people to run this experiment is when you steelman their argument and they say yes, you're getting them to tell you what their North Star is. So cool, I know what your North Star is. One, that is often a confession. That will change a lot of people's minds, just because once, for me as a swayable person, if somebody says Israel shouldn't exist, now I'm like, whoa, I'm out. I'm not on your team. Mm-hmm. So that's where it becomes really important to run that exercise. I get it. For people like you that have probably done this a gazillion times, it just gets fucking exhausting.
Yeah.
But I think we're all in a war for ideas.
Well, we are. And we all, by the way, we're all different actors in that war. Or we're different players in this game, right? If it's a video game, we're all different players. And some of us have been playing the game for a longer time, or some of us play it a little bit differently. Or if it was literally a war, you have infantry and you have air force and you have tanks and you have all these different things. So all of us act at it in different ways. I think that there are, I used to hear this, Jordan and I got into this a couple times, where sometimes people would say to him, when you do all of your talks, or you give your lectures or the biblical series, everything, it's all so beautifully thoughtful and it's just perfect orchestra of brilliance and everything else. But then on Twitter, you're too abrasive or something. And I was once at a dinner with him. I don't think I'm speaking out of school when I say this. I won't say anyone else that was there. But there was this big debate at the table, about 15 people having this debate about how Jordan tweets. And most people at the table were saying he's too aggressive on Twitter. He's got to tone back Twitter because he's going to lose a little bit of the baby with the bathwater on this thing. And I took the counter argument. And because my argument was, you're telling the person who has changed more minds and done more good for the world than anyone, certainly than I've ever met, but it's not even that I have the privilege of knowing him. It's even if I was outside of this, the amount of good that I have seen this man do, empirically do, the lives that he has turned out of, got off drugs and repaired family things and got jobs and all of the stuff, that if every now and again he throws out something that's a bit much, says this for, this about a trans whatever, or this, that, it's like saying to Donald Trump the first time around, just do it the way we want you to do it. Yes, you're largely right about the stuff, but could you just control some of the other stuff? And I find it hard to say to the guy who did the thing that everyone said couldn't be done, do it a little bit more our way. That, I think, is what maybe like the tension is between the two positions. To me, there has to be a little of that. The teeth have to be shown a little bit. Every now and again, you have to show you kind of are over it. You can always put your best foot forward and do all of that. I certainly try to do it all the time on my show. And as I said, sometimes when I'm on this side of it, a little of that can be lost for sure, because we're trying to do a lot of stuff. And I also I want to, as the guest, want to be respectful of wherever you want to go and everything else. But I think that that's basically the same argument that they were making to Trump. It's the same argument that I've heard them make to Jordan. In a weird way, it's the same argument they're making to Israel. Just like, do it. Yeah, you've done something extraordinary. You took a tiny sliver of desert in the most inhospitable place on earth. You made it flourish. You took a people who had been epically oppressed in ways that are unimaginable, like some of whom were Holocaust survivors who then had to move from Europe and ended up in the desert where nobody lived and turned it into an oasis. And also every now and again, your children to be killed, and just behave the way we want you to, or just don't speak exactly like that, and then we'll kind of like you more. And I just don't think that works. And I say all of that notwithstanding the absolutely cogent, beautiful argument that you made right there.
This has been wonderful, man.
Yeah.
Where can people follow you?
Oh my God. Well, this week I'm just wandering around Los Angeles trying not to get killed by homeless people. But besides that, in the midst of all of this, we didn't get to talk about it, but I did start a tech company because I wanted to fight big tech. So I started Locals, which was basically a way that you could subscribe and have your fans support you outside of big tech. So I started locals.com. We eventually merged with Rumble. We're basically the only sort of alternate rails, outside of YouTube and really Amazon AWS. That's where Rumble really is going in the next version of all of this, the Rumble Cloud and everything else. So people can go to they can go to Rumble, but they can go to rubinreport.locals.com, and that's where I built my community. Those are the people who support me and allow me to say all of these crazy things.
I love it.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care. Peace.
If you like this conversation, check out this episode to learn more.
If you had a prosecutor who ran for office on the promise of going after Joe Biden, I think the left would be howling bloody murder here. And they would have a good point in that case, because even though I disagree with a lot of what Biden stands for, I don't think that that's the way justice should be carried out. Yet that's